Yo, what's up? Welcome to Dark Fanfics, where stories come alive. Buckle up because today we have, what if Harry took an inheritance test at 11 and discovered Dumbledore stole 12 million galleons from him? Quick favor, if you dig this content, drop a like and subscribe. It takes just a second but means so much to us. Let's roll. Chapter 1, The inheritance revealed Harry Potter had never owned anything of value in his life. His clothes were Dudley's oversized hand-me-downs, his glasses held together with tape, and the only gift he could remember receiving was the occasional coat hanger or old sock from the Dursleys on Christmas morning. So when Hagrid had mentioned his parents leaving him something, a small spark of hope had flickered to life inside him. That spark now threatened to extinguish under the suspicious glare of the goblin teller at Gringotts Bank. "And does Mr. Harry Potter have his key?" the goblin asked, leaning forward over his high counter. Hagrid rummaged through his many coat pockets, pulling out moldy dog biscuits, several strange-looking coins, and what appeared to be a sleeping dormouse before producing a tiny golden key. "Got it here somewhere," he muttered. "Ah. Here's the little devil." The goblin took the key with long, spindly fingers, examining it closely through narrowed eyes. Something in his expression shifted, a subtle tightening around the mouth, a slight flaring of his nostrils. "This key has been frequently used," the goblin observed, his voice carrying an odd inflection that Harry couldn't quite place. "Quite frequently indeed." Hagrid shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Professor Dumbledore's had it all these years, keepin' it safe for Harry, hasn't he?" The goblin's eyes darted to Harry, then back to Hagrid. "Indeed." He snapped his fingers, and another goblin approached. "Griphook will take you to your vault, Mr. Potter." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Unless, of course, you'd like to know exactly what you're entitled to first." Hagrid cleared his throat. "That won't be necessary. We're just making a small withdrawal today. Dumbledore's orders." Harry, who had been silently observing the exchange, felt a flicker of indignation. If this was his money, his parents' money, shouldn't he know what he had? "Actually," Harry said, his voice sounding small but determined even to his own ears, "I think I would like to know." The goblin's lips curled into what might have been a smile or a snarl, Harry couldn't tell which. "Very wise, Mr. Potter. Very wise indeed." Hagrid looked suddenly flustered. "Harry, we've got a lot to do today. Dumbledore just said take ya to your vault. It won't take but a moment," the goblin interjected smoothly. "A simple inheritance test. Every heir should know what they're entitled to. It's only prudent." Something about the way the goblin emphasized the word made Harry's curiosity flare. "What's an inheritance test?" "Just a drop of blood on a special parchment," the goblin explained. "It reveals all vaults, properties, and titles you have claim to. Standard procedure for orphaned heirs of old families." Hagrid was now visibly sweating. "I don't think Dumbledore would. I want to do it," Harry said firmly, surprising himself with his own decisiveness. The goblin smiled, revealing pointed teeth. "Excellent. Follow me, Mr. Potter." He paused, looking at Hagrid. "Alone, if you please. Bank policy for inheritance matters." "Now see here," Hagrid began to protest. "It's okay, Hagrid," Harry assured him, curiosity now burning bright. "I'll be fine." Hagrid reluctantly subsided, muttering about Dumbledore not being happy. The goblin led Harry through a polished door into a corridor lined with rich mahogany and lit by floating golden lamps. They entered a room with a single desk where an older, more severe-looking goblin sat. "Inheritance test for Harry Potter," Harry's guide announced before departing. The senior goblin looked up sharply. "Potter? Well, well. I am Blood Fong, Department of Inheritances." He pulled out an ornate silver dagger and a sheet of parchment that seemed to shimmer slightly. "A drop of blood on the parchment, Mr. Potter." Harry hesitated only briefly before offering his finger. The dagger pricked almost painlessly, and a single drop of his blood fell onto the parchment. The crimson spot expanded, morphing into elegant script that spread across the page like a spiderweb. Bloodfang's eyes widened as he read, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Mr. Potter, I believe you should sit down." Harry lowered himself into the chair, a sense of foreboding creeping over him. "What is it?" "It appears," Bloodfang said slowly, "that you are not merely heir to the Potter vault." He slid the parchment toward Harry. "You are the last living heir to the most noble and ancient house of Potter, with rights to the family vault and all properties therein. You also have inherited the Black family fortune through your grandmother Doria Black, as the current Lord Black named you his heir. Furthermore, it seems you have a claim through distant relations to the Peveril and, most surprisingly, Gryffindor vaults." Harry stared at the parchment, trying to make sense of the ornate script and long lists of numbers. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means, Mr. Potter, that you are exceptionally wealthy." Bloodfang's finger traced down to a section at the bottom of the parchment. "It also means that someone has been helping themselves to your inheritance for years." Harry's eyes followed the goblin's finger to where it pointed at a long list of withdrawals. At the top of each column was the name, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. "Who's been," Harry began, then stopped as the name registered. "Professor Dumbledore? The one Hagrid keeps talking about?" Bloodfang nodded grimly. "The very same. Headmaster of Hogwarts, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and, it seems, the man who has systematically removed approximately 12 million galleons from your various vaults over the last decade." The room seemed to tilt around Harry. 12 million, he whispered, having no real concept of how much money that was, but understanding from the goblin's tone that it was an enormous sum. "A small fortune," Bloodfang confirmed. "Removed in regular increments from multiple vaults, supposedly for your care and upkeep, according to the authorization documents." Harry's mind flashed to his cupboard under the stairs, to Dudley's broken toys that became his only possessions, to the nights he went hungry because he'd been locked away without dinner. "My care and upkeep," he repeated, a cold anger starting to build in his stomach. "Indeed." Bloodfang's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Mr. Potter, have you been living in luxury these past 10 years? "No," Harry said quietly, his hands clenching into fists. "I've been living with my aunt and uncle. They..." He hesitated, feeling a strange mix of shame and anger. "They make me sleep in a cupboard under the stairs. They never buy me anything. They tell everyone I'm a burden on them." Bloodfang's expression grew darker with each word. By the time Harry finished speaking, the goblin's face was a mask of controlled fury. "I see. And did these relatives of yours receive monthly payments of 500 galleons for your care?" Harry laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised even him. "They've never stopped complaining about how much I cost them. They definitely weren't getting any galleons. As I suspected." Bloodfang pulled out another piece of parchment. "Mr. Potter, what I am about to suggest is highly unusual, but these circumstances are exceptional. Would you be willing to formally request an audit and investigation into the management of your accounts?" Harry didn't fully understand what that meant, but he understood enough. Someone, Dumbledore, had taken money meant for him, money his parents had left him, and he'd seen none of it. Meanwhile, he'd lived like an unwanted stray in a house where he was constantly reminded of his worthlessness. "Yes," he said firmly. "I want to know where my money went. And I want it back." Bloodfang's lips curved into a predatory smile. "Excellent, Mr. Potter. If I may say, you show the spirit of a goblin in matters of treasure." He pushed a blank parchment forward. "I shall need your signature here. This authorizes a full accounting of all your vaults and places a temporary freeze on all withdrawals not made by you personally." Harry took the quill Bloodfang offered, pausing only briefly before signing his name with unusual care. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Bloodfang said, rising from his seat, "we meet with the director. Ragnarok, director of Gringotts London branch, was an imposing goblin with silver-streaked hair and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. When Harry was ushered into his opulent office, the director was already reviewing the inheritance test results with an expression of cold calculation. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said without preamble, "it seems we have failed in our duty to protect your assets." Harry, feeling overwhelmed but determined, replied, "I don't blame Gringotts. I didn't even know I had any money until yesterday." A flash of what might have been respect crossed Ragnarok's face. "Nevertheless, such egregious mismanagement reflects poorly on our institution." He gestured to a chart on his desk. "Our preliminary audit shows that beyond the direct withdrawals, Dumbledore has used your vaults as collateral for several political initiatives and private endeavors. The actual impact on your estate exceeds 20 million galleons." Harry felt dizzy. Can you help me understand how much money that is? I've never had any before." Ragnarok nodded briskly. "A skilled wizard might earn 5,000 galleons annually. A ministry department head might earn 20,000. You could purchase the finest home in Wizarding Britain for 1 million. Does that provide perspective?" It did. Harry felt sick. That kind of money could have changed everything, could have given him a life away from the Dursleys, could have meant proper clothes, enough food, maybe even happiness. Why would he do this? Harry asked, his voice small. "That," Ragnarok said, "is what we intend to find out. But first, Mr. Potter, we must discuss your options." For the next hour, Harry listened as Ragnarok outlined various courses of action. He could demand immediate restitution, press criminal charges, or pursue a more strategic approach. Throughout it all, Harry found himself thinking not just about the money, but about the betrayal. This Dumbledore person, someone Hagrid clearly idolized, someone who apparently held positions of great importance, had stolen from an orphan while leaving him to suffer. "I want my money back," Harry said finally, interrupting Ragnarok's explanation of wizarding financial law. "But more than that, I want to understand why. And I don't want him to know that I know, not yet." Ragnarok's eyebrows rose. "An interesting choice, Mr. Potter. May I ask why?" Harry thought for a moment, surprising himself with the clarity of his reasoning. If he's powerful enough to take all that money without anyone stopping him, then warning him now just gives him time to hide evidence or come up with excuses. "I need to learn more first, about him, about my parents, about why I was sent to live with people who hate me." A slow smile spread across Ragnarok's face. "Mr. Potter, you show wisdom beyond your years. Very well. We shall proceed cautiously. The freeze on your accounts will appear as a standard security measure for all high-value vaults, nothing that would alert Dumbledore specifically. Meanwhile, we will continue our investigation discreetly." "Thank you," Harry said, feeling grateful but also strangely hollow. Yesterday, learning he was a wizard had been the most amazing revelation of his life. Today, he discovered that the wizard supposedly looking out for him had been stealing his birthright for years. "There is one more matter," Ragnarok added, sliding a small wooden box across the desk. "As heir to multiple ancient houses, you are entitled to wear their signet rings. They carry certain protections that may prove valuable in the coming days." Harry opened the box to find 4 rings nestled in velvet. One bore a roaring griffin, another a stylized P, the third a strange triangular symbol, and the last a noble-looking B. "These will merge into a single ring when you put them on," Ragnarok explained. "They are enchanted to fit and can only be removed by you. They also provide protection against most mind-affecting magic and detect various poisons." Harry slipped the rings onto his finger, watching in amazement as they shimmered and merged into a single gold band with all 4 symbols displayed in miniature around its circumference. A warm, tingling sensation spread up his arm, and for a moment, he felt something shift in his mind, as if a fog he hadn't known was there had partially lifted. "I feel different," he murmured. Ragnarok nodded grimly. "The rings have likely dispelled some minor compulsion charms. Another matter for our investigation. Harry's head snapped up. Someone was controlling my mind. Influencing, perhaps, rather than controlling, Ragnar corrected. But yes, it appears so. The rings will prevent such attempts going forward. A cold anger settled in Harry's chest, more focused than any he'd felt before. I want to see my vaults now, he said quietly. All of them. The cart ride deeper into Gringotts was unlike anything Harry had ever experienced, a wild, plunging journey that would have been exhilarating under different circumstances. As it was, Harry's mind was too busy processing everything he'd learned to fully appreciate the roller coaster-like descent. They stopped first at what Griphook, who had rejoined them, called his trust vault, the one Hagrid had originally intended to take him to. This vault receives an annual transfer of 5,000 galleons for your school expenses, Griphook explained as he opened the door. Harry's eyes widened at the mounds of gold, silver, and bronze coins. This alone seemed like unimaginable wealth to him, and it was just a fraction of his inheritance. Their next stop was far deeper, past underground lakes and what Harry could have sworn was a burst of flame in a distant cavern. The Potter family vault, Griphook announced as they stopped before an imposing door bearing the same stylized P as one of his rings. Unlike the trust vault, this one required Harry's blood and the presence of his ring to open. When the massive doors swung wide, Harry gasped. Gold was only the beginning. The vault was the size of the Dursleys' entire house, filled with not only mountains of coins but also furniture, paintings, weapons, books, jewelry, and countless artifacts Harry couldn't identify. Along one wall stood shelves of leather-bound books and scrolls. Your family archives, Griphook noted, following Harry's gaze. The Potter family dates back nearly 1,000 years. Harry approached the shelves with reverence, running his fingers along the spines of books that had once belonged to his ancestors, to his parents. He pulled one out at random and opened it to find a journal entry dated 1943, written by someone named Fremont Potter. Can I take some of these with me?" he asked hesitantly. "They are yours, Mr. Potter," Griphook reminded him. "You may take anything from your vaults. However, I would suggest limiting what you remove today, as your guide is likely growing impatient." Harry had almost forgotten about Hagrid waiting above. "Right," he muttered, reluctantly replacing the journal. "I'll come back." He did, however, take a small leather pouch that Griphook assured him would hold far more than its size suggested, filling it with a mix of coins. He also, after a moment's hesitation, took a small framed photograph he found on a desk, a moving image of a man who looked remarkably like him with his arm around a beautiful red-haired woman. They were laughing, occasionally turning to look at each other with such obvious love that Harry felt his throat tighten. "My parents?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Griphook nodded. "James and Lily Potter." Harry carefully placed the photograph in his pouch. It was the first image he'd ever seen of his parents. The tour continued through the Black, Peveril, and Gryffindor vaults, each containing its own treasures and history. By the time they returned to the surface, Harry's head was spinning with all he'd seen and learned. Hagrid was pacing anxiously in the lobby, his great shaggy head nearly brushing the chandelier. "Harry. There ya are. Was gettin' worried, been gone nearly 3 hours." Harry fought to keep his expression neutral, suddenly aware that Hagrid might report everything back to Dumbledore. "Sorry, Hagrid. There was more to see than I expected." Blood Fong, who had escorted Harry back to the lobby, interceded smoothly. "Mr. Potter had several matters of inheritance to address. Standard procedure for an heir coming of age." "But he's only 11, Hagrid protested. "Magical inheritance recognizes magical maturity, not physical age," Blood Fong replied, the lie flowing easily. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other clients to attend to." He gave Harry a subtle nod before departing. As they left Gringotts, Harry felt the weight of his new knowledge settling on his shoulders. Part of him wanted to confront Hagrid immediately, to demand answers about Dumbledore and the money and why he'd been left with the Dursleys. But Ragnarok's advice echoed in his mind: learn more first, understand the players and the game before making a move. Yeah, all right, Harry. Hagrid asked as they made their way down the marble steps. Ye've gone awful quiet. Harry forced a smile. Just a lot to take in. I never knew my parents left me anything. Hagrid beamed. Good people, your mum and dad. The best. Dumbledore made sure everything was kept safe fair, yeah, oh, course. It took every ounce of self-control Harry possessed not to react to that statement. Instead, he just nodded and asked, where to next? Thought we'd get your uniform, Hagrid said, checking the list Dumbledore had given him. Madame Malkin's is just down the way. As they walked through Diagon Alley, Harry's mind was racing. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. Yesterday, he'd been ecstatic just to escape the Dursleys and learn he was a wizard. Now, he knew he was the heir to 4 ancient families, fabulously wealthy, and the victim of a decade-long theft by the very man who was supposedly his guardian in the magical world. What else had Dumbledore lied about? Why had Harry been placed with the Dursleys when, according to Ragnarok, the Potters had specified alternate guardians in their will? And most importantly, what was Dumbledore doing with all that money? Harry's thoughts were interrupted when they reached Madame Malkin's. Hagrid, too large to fit comfortably in the shop, sent Harry in alone while he went for ice cream. It was a small reprieve, a moment to gather his thoughts without having to pretend everything was normal. Inside the shop, a squat, smiling witch greeted him. Hogwarts, dear. Got the lot here, another young man being fitted up just now, in fact. She led Harry to the back where a pale, blonde boy was standing on a footstool while a second witch pinned up his long black robes. Madame Malkin stood Harry on a stool next to him, slipped a robe over his head, and began to pin it to the right length. Hello, said the boy. Hogwarts too? Yes, Harry replied, studying the boy with new interest. This was another wizard, someone who had grown up in the magical world. A potential source of information. My father's next door buying my books and mother's up the street looking at wands, said the boy in a bored, drawling voice. Then I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one and I'll smuggle it in somehow. Harry was reminded forcefully of Dudley. Have you got your own broom? The boy went on. Not yet, Harry said, deciding to test a theory. He twisted his hand slightly, allowing his signet ring to become visible. I've been away from the wizarding world until recently. Trying to catch up on everything I've missed. The boy's eyes caught the gleam of Harry's ring, and his demeanor changed subtly. Old family, then? He asked, his tone more respectful. I'm Malfoy, by the way. Draco Malfoy. Harry Potter, Harry replied, watching Draco's reaction carefully. The effect was immediate. Draco's eyes widened, darting to Harry's forehead where his scar was partially visible beneath his unruly hair. I'd heard you'd be coming to Hogwarts this year, Draco said, his voice a mix of awe and calculation. Is it true you've been living with Muggles? What was that like? Terrible, Harry said honestly. They kept everything from me, who I was, what happened to my parents, all of it. I only learned I was a wizard yesterday. Draco looked genuinely appalled. But you're Harry Potter. The boy who lived. How could anyone keep that from you? Wait until my father hears about this. He's always said Dumbledore was the worst thing to happen to Hogwarts, making decisions like that. Harry's ears perked up at the mention of Dumbledore. Your father knows Dumbledore well. They're constantly at odds in the Wizengamot, Draco said with a hint of pride. Father says Dumbledore's policies would destroy our traditions and elevate mudbloods above proper wizarding families. Harry didn't know what mudbloods were, but he filed the term away for future reference. The Wizengamot, that's the wizard court, right? I'm trying to learn all I can about how our world works. It's more than just a court, Draco explained, warming to the subject. It's our governing body. The oldest families, like yours and mine, have hereditary seats. Father says it's where the real power in wizarding Britain lies, not with that fool Fudge at the ministry. This was exactly the kind of information Harry needed. He opened his mouth to ask another question when Madame Malkin said, "That's you done, my dear." Harry reluctantly hopped down from the footstool. "Maybe we'll talk more on the train to Hogwarts," he suggested to Draco. The blonde boy nodded. "Look for me. I'll introduce you to the right sort of people." His tone suggested he considered himself uniquely qualified to make that determination. As Harry paid for his robes, he reflected that while Draco seemed arrogant and prejudiced, he might still be a useful source of information, particularly about Dumbledore's political activities. The more Harry understood about the world he was entering and the man who had stolen from him, the better prepared he would be. The rest of the shopping trip passed in a blur of revelations and carefully concealed reactions. At Flourish and Blotts, Harry purchased not just his required school books but also several additional texts: Hogwarts, A History, Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, Great Wizarding Families of Britain, and Modern Magical Political Structures. When Hagrid raised his bushy eyebrows at the extra selections, Harry simply said he wanted to catch up on everything he'd missed. The most significant moment came when they entered Ollivander's to purchase Harry's wand. Mr. Ollivander, a strange, silver-eyed old man, recognized Harry immediately. "I've been expecting you, Mr. Potter," he said softly. "It seems only yesterday that your mother and father were in here buying their first wands." As Ollivander measured Harry and had him try wand after wand, he suddenly paused, fixing Harry with an unsettling stare. "Curious," he murmured, "very curious indeed." "Sorry," said Harry, "but what's curious?" "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every single wand. It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand, gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, why, its brother gave you that scar." Harry swallowed. "And who owned that wand?" "We do not speak his name," whispered Ollivander. "The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. It's not always clear why. But I think it is clear that we can expect great things from you. After all, he who must not be named did great things, terrible, yes, but great." A shiver ran down Harry's spine. There was something ominous about Ollivander's words, something that hinted at a destiny Harry wasn't sure he wanted. As they left the shop, Harry's mind was racing again. He had a connection to the wizard who had killed his parents, a connection through their wands. What did that mean? And why did Ollivander seem almost excited by the prospect? Their final stop was Elop's Owl Emporium, where Hagrid bought Harry a beautiful snowy owl as a birthday present. "Just so ye know," Hagrid said as they headed back toward the Leaky Cauldron, "owls are dead useful, carry your mail and everything." Harry looked at the sleeping owl in her cage, feeling a rush of gratitude toward Hagrid. Despite his apparent loyalty to Dumbledore, Hagrid had shown Harry nothing but kindness. This beautiful creature was the first real birthday present Harry had ever received. "Thank you, Hagrid," he said sincerely. "She's perfect." Hagrid beamed, his beetle-black eyes crinkling at the corners. "Don't mention it. Can't have ye going off to Hogwarts without a proper pet, can we? Now, best be getting ye back to them muggles." The reminder of the Dursleys dampened Harry's spirits considerably. After everything he'd learned today, the thought of returning to Privet Drive was even more depressing than before. He now knew he owned multiple properties, actual houses that had belonged to his parents and ancestors. Yet Dumbledore had placed him with the Dursleys instead, all while helping himself to Harry's fortune. "Hagrid," Harry began hesitantly as they sat in the underground train back to Surrey, "why was I sent to live with the Dursleys? Didn't my parents have any wizard friends who could have taken me in?" Hagrid shifted uncomfortably. "Well now, that's complicated, that is. Dumbledore had his reasons. Said yet be safest with your mother's blood. Something about ancient protection magic. But they hate me," Harry said quietly. They've always hated me. And they hate magic too. Hagrid's expression darkened. They what? Hate magic? But surely they told ya something. About who ya are, about your parents. Harry shook his head. They told me my parents died in a car crash. They punished me whenever anything strange happened. They made me sleep in a cupboard under the stairs for 10 years. A cupboard? Hagrid bellowed, causing several nearby muggles to jump in alarm. He lowered his voice, but his outrage remained evident. "Ya mean ter tell me that Lily and James Potter's son, the boy who lived, was kept in a bloody cupboard?" Harry nodded, watching Hagrid's reaction carefully. The giant man seemed genuinely shocked and angered, which suggested he at least hadn't known about the specifics of Harry's treatment. "Dumbledore said yet be looked after," Hagrid muttered, more to himself than to Harry. "Said the family was the best place for ya. Did Dumbledore ever check on me?" Harry asked. "Did anyone from the wizarding world ever come to see how I was doing?" Hagrid's brow furrowed. I don't rightly know. Dumbledore always said he was keeping an eye on ya, but..." He trailed off, looking troubled. Harry decided to push a little further. "Hagrid, if my parents were wealthy, why didn't any of that money go toward my upkeep? Uncle Vernon's always complaining about how expensive I am to keep." Now Hagrid looked completely bewildered. "That can't be right. Your trust vault was set up special, part of it was supposed to go to whoever was raising ya. Dumbledore arranged it all with the goblins." Harry feigned innocence. "Maybe something went wrong. The Dursleys definitely never received any wizard money. They wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway." Hagrid was frowning deeply now, his hands twisting in his lap. "Something's not right about this. I'll have to speak to Dumbledore when I get back." "Please don't," Harry said quickly. "I don't want to cause trouble before I even get to Hogwarts. I just wanted to understand." Hagrid gave him a long look, then sighed heavily. "All right, Harry. But I don't like the sound of how them Dursleys have been treating ya. Not one bit." When they finally reached Privet Drive, Harry stood on the doorstep with his trunk, owl cage, and a head full of swirling questions and plans. "Your ticket for Hogwarts," Hagrid said, handing him an envelope. "First September, King's Cross, it's all on your ticket. Any problems with the Dursleys, send me an owl. Your owl will know how to find me." "Thanks for everything, Hagrid," Harry said sincerely. Hagrid looked at him fondly. "No need to thank me. I knew your parents, you know. They'd be proud of ya." After Hagrid departed with a crack of apparition, Harry turned to face the Dursley home with a new perspective. 1 month. He had 1 month to prepare before heading to Hogwarts. 1 month to read everything he could about the wizarding world, to understand what he was walking into, and to plan his next steps against Albus Dumbledore. The front door opened to reveal Uncle Vernon's purple face. "Back, are you?" he sneered. "What's all this rubbish?" Harry looked at his uncle steadily, no longer intimidated. He knew something now that changed everything: he wasn't powerless anymore. He had resources, knowledge, and a growing determination to take control of his own destiny. "My school supplies," he replied calmly. "I'd like to take them to my room, please." Vernon's face darkened. "Your room? You mean your cupboard?" "No," Harry said firmly. "I mean Dudley's second bedroom. The one with all his broken toys. I'll be staying there now." "Now see here, boy," Vernon began, raising a meaty fist. "I wouldn't," Harry interrupted quietly. "My new friend Hagrid was very upset when I told him you've been keeping me in a cupboard all these years. He's going to check on me, you know. And he can turn people into pigs." It wasn't exactly a lie. Hagrid had tried to turn Dudley into a pig and only partially succeeded. But Vernon didn't need to know the details. The effect was immediate. Vernon's face drained of color, and he took an involuntary step backward. You told them about the cupboard?" "I did," Harry confirmed. "Now, about that bedroom." Hours later, Harry sat on the bed in his new room, surrounded by his school books and the few personal treasures he'd acquired in Diagon Alley. His owl, whom he'd named Hedwig after a name he'd found in A History of Magic, was perched on the open windowsill, her amber eyes watching him intently. "What do you think, Hedwig?" Harry murmured as he stroked her feathers. "Ready to help me figure this all out?" She nipped his finger affectionately, which he took as agreement. Harry pulled out the most immediately relevant book from his pile, Great Wizarding Families of Britain. If he was the heir to 4 ancient houses, he needed to understand what that meant in wizarding society. As he flipped through the pages, certain patterns became clear. The oldest families, particularly those with seats on the Wizengamot, wielded enormous influence in magical Britain. They controlled not just wealth but political power, cultural institutions, and in many cases, historical artifacts of great magical significance. The entry on the Potters described them as an ancient line dating to the 12th century, known for innovation in potions and charms, and steadfast opposition to the classification of magics as dark or light. They had traditionally allied with progressive elements, while maintaining deep respect for magical tradition and heritage. The Black family, by contrast, was described as notoriously selective in its associations, with unwavering commitment to blood purity and the preservation of ancient magical knowledge, regardless of modern classification. However, the book noted that recent generations have seen significant ideological divisions within the family. The Peveril entry was frustratingly brief, mentioning only that the line was presumed extinct in the male line, but had contributed significantly to magical theory and artifact creation in the 13th century. Most surprising was the Gryffindor entry, which stated unequivocally that no verified descendants of Godric Gryffindor have come forward in the modern era, though several families claim distant connection. The fact that the inheritance test had recognized Harry as a Gryffindor heir suggested something significant that even this comprehensive text didn't acknowledge. Harry rubbed his eyes, trying to process everything. He'd gone from being just Harry, unwanted, unloved, and insignificant, to discovering he was the heir to 4 powerful magical bloodlines. And someone had tried very hard to keep that knowledge from him. He picked up his other purchase, a leather-bound journal he'd bought on impulse at Flourish and Blots. Opening it to the first blank page, he began to write, questions to answer. 1. Why did Dumbledore steal my money? 2. Where did it go? 3. Why was I placed with the Dursleys when my parents likely specified other guardians? 4. Who else knows about any of this? 5. What does being an heir to 4 houses mean for me at Hogwarts? 6. Can I trust anyone at Hogwarts, given that Dumbledore is headmaster? He paused, tapping his quill against the page. Then he added, 7. Who am I, really? Everyone seems to know more about Harry Potter than I do. Setting the journal aside, Harry picked up the photograph of his parents. They waved at him from the frame, their faces alight with happiness. His mother's green eyes, the same as his own, sparkled with life. "I'll figure this out," he promised them quietly. "And I'll make it right." In the month that followed, Harry threw himself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even him. He read all his textbooks from cover to cover, plus the additional books he'd purchased. He practiced wand movements with a stick similar in size to his wand, being careful not to use his actual wand, as Hagrid had warned about the restriction on underage magic. He made lists of important people, places, and events in recent wizarding history. He also wrote to Gringotts regularly, using Hedwig to maintain communication with Bloodfang. The goblins kept him updated on their audit progress, sending him reports on where his money had gone. The picture that emerged was troubling. Dumbledore had used Harry's inheritance to fund everything from the Order of the Phoenix, a vigilante group he'd led during the war against Voldemort, to various political initiatives in the Wizengamot. Most disturbingly, he'd used Harry's money to make donations to ministry officials who later supported his policies or appointments. There was no evidence that the Dursleys had received a single canute of the monthly stipend supposedly allocated for Harry's care. By the time September 1st arrived, Harry had developed not just knowledge but a plan. He would go to Hogwarts as expected. He would learn magic, make allies, and observe Dumbledore carefully. He would say nothing about what he knew until he was ready to act decisively. As Uncle Vernon dropped him at King's Cross with barely concealed glee at his departure, Harry smiled to himself. Dumbledore might think he was welcoming a naive, grateful, malleable boy into Hogwarts, a boy who would worship him as Hagrid did, a boy who would be so overwhelmed by the magical world that he'd never question its inconsistencies. Instead, he was getting someone very different, a boy who knew he'd been betrayed, who understood the value of what had been taken from him, and who was determined to reclaim his legacy, all of it. Harry Potter pushed his trolley toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, Hedwig's cage balanced precariously atop his trunk. As he approached the seemingly solid wall, he took a deep breath, thinking of everything he'd learned and everything still to come. Then he broke into a run, heading straight for his future with eyes wide open. Chapter 2, Allies and Enemies. The Scarlet Hogwarts Express billowed steam across platform 9 3/4, its whistle piercing the morning air as students rushed to board. Harry stood for a moment, absorbing the chaos and energy of the scene. Families embraced, owls hooted indignantly from their cages, and older students shouted greetings across the crowded platform. He was really here. Despite everything he'd learned about Dumbledore, despite the anger that occasionally threatened to consume him, Harry couldn't help the flutter of excitement in his chest. This was the world his parents had belonged to, the world he should have grown up in. Need a hand with that trunk? Harry turned to find a tall, red-headed boy with a friendly, freckled face smiling at him. Yes, please, Harry replied, grateful for the offer. His trunk was heavy with the extra books he'd crammed inside. Oi, Fred. George. Give us a hand, the boy called to a pair of identical twins who were laughing with a group of friends nearby. With their help, Harry's trunk was soon safely stowed in an empty compartment. As Harry pushed his sweaty hair out of his eyes, one of the twins noticed his scar. Blimey, he said. Are you? He is, the other twin interrupted. Aren't you? Am I what? Harry asked, though he knew what was coming. Harry Potter, they chorused. Harry nodded, trying not to sigh. He was still getting used to being recognized. Fred and George Weasley, one of the twins, introduced himself, then pointed to his brother, and that's our little brother, Ron. He's new too. Ron, the boy who'd first offered help, gave a small wave, his ears turning slightly pink. A whistle sounded, signaling the train's imminent departure. The twins hurried off to find their friends, leaving Harry alone with Ron. Mind if I sit here? Ron asked, gesturing to the seat opposite Harry. Everywhere else is full. Harry gestured for him to join. As the train pulled away from the station, he studied Ron covertly. The boy's robes were slightly too short and clearly second-hand. There was a smudge of dirt on his nose and a look of genuine eagerness about him. I'm Ron Weasley, he introduced himself officially. Harry Potter, Harry replied, then added with a small smile, but I guess you knew that. Ron flushed. Sorry about my brothers. They can be a bit much. He hesitated, then asked the question Harry was beginning to expect, do you really have the, you know? He pointed to Harry's forehead. Harry lifted his bangs to show the lightning scar. Wicked, Ron breathed. And do you remember anything about, you know, when you know who tried to kill me? Harry finished. Not really. Just a lot of green light. Nothing else. That wasn't strictly true. Since receiving his signet ring, Harry had experienced flashes of memory, a high, cold laugh, his mother's pleading voice, and sometimes, in nightmares, a face so pale it seemed to glow in darkness. But these weren't details he wanted to share. Ron seemed to realize he might be overstepping. Sorry, he mumbled. I shouldn't ask about that. It's fine, Harry said easily. I've been getting a lot of that since finding out I'm famous. Bit weird, really. Ron's eyes widened. You didn't know you were famous? Harry shook his head, seeing an opening to gather information. I was raised by Muggles. My aunt and uncle. They never told me anything about magic or my parents or Voldemort. Ron gasped at the name. Sorry, Harry said. Should I not say his name? No one does, Ron whispered, looking around as if the dark wizard might materialize from the mention. Everyone just says you know who. Harry filed this information away. The point is, I'm still learning about the wizarding world. There's so much I don't know. Ron's discomfort vanished, replaced with eager helpfulness. I can tell you what I know. I mean, I grew up with it all, so. Over the next hour, Ron told Harry about growing up in a magical family, about the Ministry of Magic where his father worked, and about Hogwarts. Harry listened attentively, asking strategic questions that might give him insight into Dumbledore's role and reputation. Dad says Dumbledore's the greatest wizard alive, Ron said reverently when Harry casually inquired about the headmaster. He's the only one you know who was ever afraid of. Is he involved in politics too? Harry asked. Beyond Hogwarts, I mean. Ron nodded. He's chief warlock of the Wizengamot, that's like the highest court, and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Dad says nothing important happens in magical Britain without Dumbledore having a say. Harry absorbed this, thinking of the reports from Gringotts. Dumbledore wielded enormous power, and he'd been using Harry's money to solidify and expand that power. The more Harry learned, the more calculating the headmaster seemed. Their conversation was interrupted when the compartment door slid open to reveal a round-faced boy on the verge of tears. Sorry, he said miserably, but have you seen a toad? I've lost mine. No, sorry, Ron replied. The boy looked devastated. He keeps getting away from me. I'm Neville, by the way. Neville Longbottom. Harry straightened, recognizing the name from his reading. The Longbottoms were an old, respected family, and if he recalled correctly, they had been allies of his parents. I'm Harry Potter, he said, standing to shake Neville's hand. This is Ron Weasley. We'll help you look for your toad, if you'd like. Neville's eyes widened at Harry's name, but unlike most people, he didn't immediately stare at the scar. Instead, he seemed to retreat further into himself. That's all right, he mumbled. I don't want to be a bother. It's no bother, Harry insisted, curious about this boy who might represent a connection to his parents' past. Besides, I could use a walk. Ron looked less enthusiastic but stood to join them. The three boys had just stepped into the corridor when they nearly collided with a girl with bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, she said in a bossy sort of voice. We were just going to help look, Harry explained. The girl's eyes swept over them, settling on Harry with sudden recognition. You're Harry Potter. I've read all about you, you're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Am I? Harry asked, genuinely surprised. He'd skimmed those books but hadn't paid close attention to references to himself. Goodness, didn't you know? I'd have found out everything I could if it was me, she said. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. And you are, she added, turning to Ron. Ron Weasley, he muttered. Pleasure, she said briskly. I've been asking around about Neville's toad. No one's seen it yet, but I thought we might try asking a prefect to use a summoning charm. That's actually a good idea, Harry said, impressed despite her somewhat abrasive manner. Do you know where to find one? Hermione nodded importantly. There's a prefect's compartment at the front of the train. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. As they made their way through the train, Harry hung back slightly to walk beside Neville. Longbottom, he said quietly. I've read about your family. They were friends with my parents, weren't they? Neville looked startled. Why you know about that? Not much, Harry admitted. Just that our families were allies. I'd like to hear more sometime, if you don't mind talking about it. Neville's face clouded. I don't know much either. My gran doesn't like to talk about that time. Harry sensed there was more to the story, but before he could probe further, they reached the prefect's compartment where Hermione was already explaining Neville's situation to a tall, red-haired boy with a shiny prefect badge. Well, the summoning charm is actually NEWT level, the prefect said pompously, but I can try a simple location charm. What's the toad's name? Trevor, Neville supplied nervously. The prefect, who introduced himself as Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother, performed a complex wand movement while muttering an incantation. A faint blue glow emanated from his wand, pulsing in the direction of the food trolley several carriages away. There you are, Percy said with satisfaction. Your toad appears to be near the food trolley. Probably attracted by the smell. Thank you. Neville said, looking relieved as they hurried in that direction. Sure enough, Trevor was found attempting to burrow into a box of chocolate frogs. After retrieving him and thanking Percy, the 4 first-years headed back toward their compartments. You should keep a better eye on that toad, Longbottom, came a drawling voice from a nearby compartment. Draco Malfoy stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 large, mean-looking boys. His eyes landed on Harry. Potter. I was wondering where you'd gotten to. Malfoy, Harry acknowledged with a nod, aware of Ron stiffening beside him. I see you've met Weasley, Draco continued, giving Ron a disdainful look. Red hair, hand-me-down robes, some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. He extended his hand, but Harry didn't take it. He was acutely aware that this was a pivotal moment. His response would define his allegiances in ways that might have far-reaching consequences. The Malfoys were powerful, and Draco clearly expected Harry to choose his side over Ron's. But Harry had spent the past month learning about wizarding politics and family alliances. The Malfoys had been supporters of Voldemort, whatever they claimed afterward. The Weasleys, according to what he'd read, had stood firmly against the Dark Lord. And while Harry was determined to keep an open mind and gather allies from all quarters, he wouldn't betray the principles his parents had died for. I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself, thanks, he said coolly, making his choice. Draco's pale cheeks flushed pink. Be careful, Potter. Unless you're politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. Harry felt a surge of anger but kept his expression controlled. Is that a threat, Malfoy? The 2 large boys behind Draco, Crabbe and Goyle, Harry recalled from their brief meeting in Madame Malkin's, stepped forward menacingly. More like friendly advice, Draco said, though his tone was anything but friendly. Things are changing in the wizarding world. Best to be on the right side when they do. With that cryptic statement, he turned and stalked back into his compartment, his cronies following. I hate him, Ron muttered as they continued down the corridor. Our families have been feuding for generations. Dad says his father was right in you-know-who's inner circle. He claimed he was under the Imperious Curse, Hermione chimed in knowingly. I read about it in The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts. A lot of you-know-who's supporters said they were being controlled after he disappeared. Harry nodded thoughtfully. Another piece of the puzzle. The Malfoys had been Death Eaters but had escaped punishment. They retained their wealth and influence despite their association with Voldemort. Meanwhile, Harry had been stripped of his inheritance by the leader of the opposition to Voldemort. The politics of the wizarding world were murky indeed. After Neville and Hermione returned to their compartments, Harry and Ron spent the remainder of the journey discussing lighter topics, Quidditch, wizard candy, and what to expect at Hogwarts. By the time they changed into their robes, Harry had decided Ron was genuinely likable, if somewhat naive. The boy clearly idolized Dumbledore, as did most of Wizarding Britain, but Harry sensed no guile or calculation in him. That made Ron both a potentially valuable friend and a risky confidant. As the train slowed to a stop at Hogsmeade Station, Harry felt a complex mixture of emotions: excitement about finally reaching Hogwarts, anxiety about facing Dumbledore, and a steely determination to uncover the truth while building the alliances he would need. Furs years. Furs years over here. Hagrid's familiar voice boomed across the platform. The giant man beamed when he spotted Harry. "All right there, Harry." Harry nodded, giving Hagrid a genuine smile. Whatever the groundskeeper's loyalties, Harry believed his kindness was real. The first years followed Hagrid down a steep, narrow path to a fleet of small boats on the shore of a vast, black lake. And there, perched atop a mountain on the other side, was Hogwarts Castle, its windows sparkling in the starry night, towers and turrets reaching toward the sky. It was the most beautiful thing Harry had ever seen. "No more and 4 to a boat," Hagrid called. Harry and Ron climbed into a boat with Neville and Hermione. As they glided across the still water, Harry gazed up at the castle, his new home, but also the domain of the man who had betrayed him. "It's magnificent," Hermione whispered, her academic demeanor momentarily giving way to awe. Harry had to agree. Whatever lay ahead, whatever machinations Dumbledore had planned, Hogwarts itself represented something pure, the promise of magic, of learning, of belonging. Harry was determined to embrace that promise while still guarding against those who would use him for their own ends. After the boat ride, Hagrid led them up to the castle's massive oak front doors, where he knocked 3 times. The door swung open to reveal a tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes, her severe expression making it clear she was not someone to cross. "The Furs years, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid announced. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She led them into a small, empty chamber off the entrance hall, where they could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right, the rest of the school already assembled. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Professor McGonagall said. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses." As she explained the 4 houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, and the house point system, Harry studied her carefully. According to his reading, McGonagall was Dumbledore's deputy and a staunch ally. But she also had a reputation for fairness and integrity. Harry wondered if she knew about Dumbledore's theft, or if she too was being deceived. "The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school," McGonagall concluded. "I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry automatically tried to flatten his unruly hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." As soon as she left, anxious whispers broke out among the first years. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" Harry asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Beside them, Hermione was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learned and wondering which one she'd need. Neville looked terrified. Harry took a deep breath, centering himself. This was it, his first real test in the wizarding world. The house he was sorted into would shape his experience at Hogwarts, influencing who his allies were, how he was perceived, and perhaps even how closely Dumbledore watched him. His thoughts were interrupted by several people screaming. He turned to see about 20 ghosts streaming through the back wall, pearly white and slightly transparent, deep in conversation until they noticed the first years. "New students," exclaimed a fat monk. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," came Professor McGonagall's sharp voice as she returned. "The sorting ceremony's about to start." She led them through double doors into the Great Hall, a magnificent space lit by thousands of candles floating above 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers sat. And there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry's first glimpse of the man who had stolen 12 million galleons from him was anticlimactic. Dumbledore looked exactly like his chocolate frog card, an old man with silver hair and beard long enough to tuck into his belt, half-moon spectacles perched on a crooked nose, and twinkling blue eyes that seemed to find Harry immediately in the crowd of first-years. Harry felt a slight pressure in his head as their eyes met, the faintest sensation that someone was trying to peer inside his mind. Almost immediately, his signet ring warmed against his finger, and the sensation vanished. Dumbledore's expression flickered briefly with surprise before settling back into benign welcome. So, Harry thought grimly, the ring's protection against mind magic had already proven useful. Dumbledore had just tried to read his thoughts. Professor McGonagall placed a four-legged stool in front of the first-years, and on top of it, a pointed wizard's hat that was patched, frayed, and extremely dirty. To Harry's surprise, a rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing a song about the four houses and their qualities. When it finished, the whole hall burst into applause. The hat bowed to each of the four tables and then became still again. "So we've just got to try on the hat," Ron whispered to Harry, looking relieved. "I'll kill Fred," he was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. But trying on the hat wasn't the simple task Ron imagined. What if the hat announced to the entire hall that he was the heir to four ancient houses? What if it somehow detected his suspicions about Dumbledore? What if it placed him in Slytherin, the house associated with Voldemort, simply because he was being cautious and calculating? Professor McGonagall began calling students forward alphabetically to be sorted. Harry watched as Abbott, Hannah, became a Hufflepuff, Bones, Susan, joined her, and Boot, Terry, went to Ravenclaw. As the sorting continued, Harry noticed Dumbledore watching the proceedings with apparent mild interest, occasionally applauding politely regardless of which house received a new student. Yet Harry could feel the headmaster's attention repeatedly returning to him, evaluating, calculating. Hermione Granger almost ran to the stool when her name was called and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. After nearly a full minute, the hat shouted, "Gryffindor." Ron groaned beside Harry. When Neville Longbottom was called, he tripped on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time with him too before declaring, "Gryffindor." Neville ran off still wearing the hat and had to jog back amid gales of laughter. Draco Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, "Slytherin." Malfoy joined Crabbe and Goyle at the Slytherin table, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon. Not. Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil, and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then, at last, Potter, Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out all over the hall. "Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter?" The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Then he was staring at the black inside of the hat, waiting. Said a small voice in his ear. "Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. But what's this? Heir to four houses. Most unusual, and such suspicion for one so young. You've been betrayed, haven't you? And by Albus himself, how interesting." Harry gripped the edges of the stool, suddenly terrified. If the hat announced Dumbledore's theft to the whole hall? "Don't worry," the small voice chuckled. "I don't reveal secrets. That's not my purpose. But where to put you? You could be great in Slytherin, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin would help you on the path to greatness, no doubt about that." Not Slytherin, Harry thought desperately. If Dumbledore stole from me because he feared I'd become like Voldemort, being sorted into Slytherin would only confirm his suspicions. I need to appear trustworthy while I learn more. Not Slytherin, said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know, it's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that. No. Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table, where he was receiving the loudest cheer yet. Percy the prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" As he sat down opposite the ghost in the ruff he'd seen earlier, Harry glanced up at the high table again. Hagrid gave him a thumbs up. Professor McGonagall was calling the next name. And Dumbledore. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression of satisfied benevolence, as if everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The thought sent a chill down Harry's spine. Had the old wizard somehow manipulated the sorting too? Or was he simply pleased that Harry had landed in Gryffindor, the house of his parents, the house that would keep him firmly in Dumbledore's orbit? The sorting continued. Ron, as expected, joined Harry in Gryffindor, looking deeply relieved as he collapsed into the chair next to him. Zabini, Blaise, became a Slytherin, and Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Albus Dumbledore got to his feet, beaming at the students, his arms opened wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down as everybody clapped and cheered. Harry stared. "Is he, a bit mad?" he asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad?" Percy repeated airily. "He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes." "Potatoes, Harry." The dishes in front of them were now piled with food. Harry's stomach rumbled. The Dursleys had never starved him, exactly, but he'd never been allowed as much as he wanted. He loaded his plate with a bit of everything and began to eat. As dinner progressed, Harry engaged in friendly conversation with his new housemates while discreetly observing the high table. Besides Dumbledore, he recognized Hagrid, drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to a tiny wizard who must be Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher. And there, on Dumbledore's other side, was a sallow-faced man with greasy black hair and a hooked nose who seemed to be deliberately avoiding looking in Harry's direction. "Who's that teacher talking to Professor Dumbledore?" Harry asked Percy. "That's Professor Quirrell, our new defense against the dark arts teacher. No wonder he looks so nervous, that position's jinxed. No one lasts more than a year. The one on Dumbledore's other side is Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but everyone knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape." Harry watched Snape for a while, but the potions master never glanced his way. Meanwhile, Professor Quirrell's eyes occasionally darted toward Harry with an expression that wasn't quite fear, wasn't quite hatred, but something unsettlingly in between. After dessert, Dumbledore got to his feet again, and the hall fell silent. "Just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. And a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well." Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. "I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death." Harry laughed, but he was one of the few who did. "He's not serious," he muttered to Percy. "Must be," Percy said, frowning at Dumbledore. "It's odd, because he usually gives us a reason why we're not allowed to go somewhere. The forest's full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I'd have thought he'd have told us prefects, at least. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. After the cacophonous rendition of the school song, the students were dismissed to their dormitories. As Harry followed Percy up the marble staircase, his mind was racing, cataloguing everything he'd observed about Dumbledore and the school. The third-floor corridor, why announce a deadly restriction without explanation? It practically invited curiosity. And why had Quirrell looked at him with such strange intensity? And Snape's deliberate avoidance. By the time they reached the portrait of the fat lady and entered the Gryffindor common room, Harry had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear, Hogwarts was a maze of secrets, and Dumbledore stood at its center, pulling strings Harry was only beginning to discern. The first week of classes was a whirlwind of new experiences. Harry discovered he was hopeless at astronomy, decent at herbology, and surprisingly good at charms. History of magic, taught by the ghost Professor Binns, was universally acknowledged as the most boring class, while Transfiguration under Professor McGonagall proved to be rigorous but fascinating. Through it all, Harry observed and listened, building a mental map of Hogwarts' power dynamics and his place within them. He was quickly learning that his fame made him a figure of interest to students and teachers alike. Everyone seemed to have preconceived notions about the boy who lived. Snape, in particular, appeared to have formed a deeply negative opinion of Harry before ever meeting him. In their first potions lesson, the professor singled Harry out immediately. "Ah, yes," he said softly, "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity." Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle sniggered behind their hands. Snape finished calling the roll and looked up at the class, his eyes cold and empty. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making," he began in barely more than a whisper. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." Silence followed this little speech. Harry exchanged looks with Ron, while Hermione Granger was on the edge of her seat, looking desperate to prove she wasn't a dunderhead. "Potter," said Snape suddenly. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry blinked, momentarily taken aback. Then he remembered reading about this in 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi during his preparation. "A sleeping potion so powerful it's known as the Draught of Living Death, sir," he answered carefully. Something flickered in Snape's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disappointment that Harry knew the answer. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" Snape continued, his voice colder. Again, Harry knew this one. "In the stomach of a goat, sir. It's a stone that will save you from most poisons." Snape's lips thinned. "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane?" Harry hesitated, trying to remember. Beside him, Hermione's hand was stretching toward the dungeon ceiling. "I believe they're the same plant, sir," Harry said slowly, "also known as aconite." Snape's expression was unreadable for a long moment. "Then, correct," he said curtly. "For your information, everyone, a bezoar is indeed a stone taken from the stomach of a goat and it will save you from most poisons. Asphodel and wormwood do make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the Draught of Living Death. And monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant, also known by the name of aconite." He paused, scanning the room. "Well, why aren't you all copying that down?" There was a sudden rummaging for quills and parchment. Over the noise, Snape added, "and a point to Gryffindor for Potter's adequate preparation." The single point was grudgingly given, but it was the closest thing to a compliment Snape seemed capable of offering a Gryffindor. Harry suspected his correct answers had forced the professor to re-evaluate whatever assumptions he'd made about Harry's character or intelligence. As the lesson progressed, Harry partnered with Ron to brew a simple potion to cure boils. Snape swept around in his long black cloak, criticizing almost everyone except Malfoy, whom he seemed to favor. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy had stewed his horned slugs when clouds of acid green smoke and a loud hissing filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was seeping across the stone floor, burning holes in people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaned in pain as angry red boils sprang up all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy," snarled Snape, clearing the spilled potion away with one wave of his wand. "I suppose you added the porcupine quills before taking the cauldron off the fire?" Neville whimpered as boils started to pop up all over his nose. "Take him up to the hospital wing," Snape spat at Seamus. As they left, Snape rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. "You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? Thought he'd make you look good if he got it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor." This was so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron kicked him behind their cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "I've heard Snape can turn nasty." Harry nodded slightly, swallowing his protest. The interaction confirmed what he'd suspected from reading about his parents' time at Hogwarts. Snape had a long-standing grudge against his father, James Potter, and was now transferring that resentment to Harry. It was petty but predictable, and possibly useful information. Every relationship, every grudge, every alliance could be significant in understanding the web of intrigue surrounding Dumbledore's theft. As they climbed the steps out of the dungeon an hour later, Harry was thoughtful while Ron was fuming. "Cheer up," Harry told him. "Snape's horrible to almost everyone. Did you see how he treated Neville?" "Snape seemed to really hate you, though," Ron observed. "Wonder why?" Harry shrugged, not wanting to share his theories yet. "Some people just take an instant dislike to others. Come on, Hagrid invited us to tea this afternoon." Hagrid's hut was a small wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. When Harry knocked, they heard a frantic scrabbling from inside and several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out, saying, "Back, Fong, back." Hagrid's big, hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fong." He let them in, struggling to keep a hold on the collar of an enormous black boarhound. The inside of Hagrid's hut was cozy if cluttered, one room with hams and pheasants hanging from the ceiling, a copper kettle boiling on the open fire, and a massive bed with a patchwork quilt in the corner. "Make yourselves at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fong, who bounded straight at Ron and started licking his ears. Like Hagrid, Fong was clearly not as fierce as he looked. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, who was pouring boiling water into a large teapot and putting rock cakes onto a plate. "Another Weasley, said Hagrid, glancing at Ron's freckles. "I spent half me life chasin' your twin brothers away from the forest." The rock cakes were shapeless lumps that nearly broke their teeth, but Harry and Ron pretended to enjoy them as they told Hagrid about their first lessons. Fong rested his head on Harry's knee and drooled all over his robes. Harry was delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch, the caretaker who had already threatened to lock Harry in the dungeons for dripping mud in the entrance hall, that old git. "And, as fair that cat, Mrs. Norris, I'd like ter introduce her to Fong sometime. Dia know, every time I go up ter the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her, Filch puts her up to it." Harry told Hagrid about Snape's potions lesson. Hagrid, like Ron, told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape hardly liked any of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me," Harry insisted, watching Hagrid's reaction closely. "Rubbish," said Hagrid, not quite meeting Harry's eyes. "Why should he?" Harry noticed that Hagrid's hands twitched slightly as he spoke, a tell that the giant man was hiding something. While Ron told Hagrid about Charlie's work with dragons, Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under the tea cozy. It was a cutting from the Daily Prophet, Gringotts break-in. Latest investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on July 31st, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault in question, number 713, had in fact been emptied earlier that same day. "But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your noses out if you know what's good for you," said a Gringotts spokesgoblin this afternoon. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Ron hadn't mentioned the date. "Hagrid," said Harry, "that Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. It might have been happening while we were there." Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The vault in question, number 713, had been emptied earlier that same day. Hagrid had emptied vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out that grubby little package. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, their pockets weighed down with rock cakes they'd been too polite to refuse, Harry's mind was racing. The mysterious package from Vault 713. The forbidden third-floor corridor. Dumbledore's theft of Harry's inheritance, were they connected? It seemed too coincidental that Gringotts would be broken into the very day Hagrid removed something on Dumbledore's orders. Harry made a mental note to ask Blood Fong about the break-in in his next letter. The goblins might have insights they hadn't shared with the prophet. Over the next few weeks, Harry settled into a routine at Hogwarts, carefully balancing his studies, his growing friendships, and his private investigation into Dumbledore's activities. He wrote regular letters to Gringotts, updating them on his situation and receiving reports on their audit of his accounts. The picture that emerged from these communications was troubling. Beyond the direct withdrawals, Dumbledore had used Harry's inheritance as collateral for numerous political and social initiatives. He'd established something called the Phoenix Foundation, shortly after Voldemort's fall, ostensibly to aid victims of the war. While some of the Foundation's activities seemed legitimate, a significant portion of its funds had gone to administrative costs and vague research initiatives that the goblins were still trying to trace. Most disturbingly, Blood Fong reported that portions of Harry's money had been used to make donations to key ministry officials who later supported Dumbledore's policies or appointments. In effect, Blood Fong wrote in one particularly detailed report, "The Chief Warlock has been using your inheritance to build and maintain his political power base for the past decade. This goes beyond simple theft, it constitutes a systematic misappropriation of the Potter legacy for political ends." Harry had tucked that letter away in his trunk, beneath a secret compartment he'd discovered in the bottom, along with his growing collection of notes and observations about Dumbledore's current activities at Hogwarts. One evening in mid-October, Harry sat alone in a quiet corner of the Gryffindor common room, ostensibly working on a transfiguration essay but actually drafting another letter to Blood Fong. Ron was engaged in a heated chess match with Dean Thomas, while Hermione, who had become an unexpected addition to their friend group after a troll incident on Halloween, was helping Neville with his potions homework. "Working hard, Harry?" Harry looked up to see Fred and George Weasley standing over him, identical mischievous grins on their faces. "Just finishing McGonagall's essay," Harry said, quickly covering his letter with his textbook. "Boring," Fred, or possibly George, declared. "We've got something much more interesting to show you. If you're interested in a bit of nighttime exploration," the other twin added with a wink. Harry raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." The twins glanced around conspiratorially, then sat on either side of Harry, leaning in close. "We've noticed you're a bit more observant than most first years," George said quietly. "Always asking questions, always watching," Fred continued. "Particularly where a certain headmaster is concerned." Harry felt a jolt of alarm. Had he been that obvious? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. "Relax, Harry," George chuckled. "We're not here to pry. We just thought you might appreciate a certain tool we've acquired." Fred pulled something from inside his robes and laid it on the table, still mostly covered by his hand. It looked like an old, blank piece of parchment. This, he whispered reverently, is the secret to our success. A ratty old bit of parchment? Harry asked skeptically. O ye of little faith, George admonished. He pulled out his wand, touched the parchment lightly, and whispered, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. And at once, thin ink lines began to spread like a spider's web from the point that George's wand had touched. They joined each other, they crisscrossed, they fanned into every corner of the parchment, then words began to blossom across the top, great, curly green words, that proclaimed, Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauder's map. Harry's breath caught. It was a map showing every detail of the Hogwarts castle and grounds. But the truly remarkable thing was the tiny ink dots moving around it, each labeled with a name in minuscule writing. You see? Fred whispered excitedly. This map shows everyone in the castle. Where they are, what they're doing, every minute of every day. Filch, Mrs. Norris, Peeves, the professors, everyone, George added. Harry stared in amazement as a labeled dot for Albus Dumbledore paced back and forth in what must be the headmaster's office. Where did you get this? He asked, his mind racing with the possibilities such a tool presented. Nicked it from Filch's office in our first year, Fred said proudly. He never knew what it was, the old fool. Thought it was just some joke product, George agreed. But we figured out how to work it. And now, we're passing it on to you, Fred finished. Harry looked up at them in surprise. To me? But why? The twins exchanged a look that Harry couldn't quite decipher. Let's just say, George began carefully, that we've noticed certain discrepancies in how Dumbledore presents himself versus how he actually behaves. And we've noticed you noticing, Fred added. 3 observers are better than 2, especially when one has a personal stake in the matter. Harry's heart raced. The twins knew, or at least suspected, something about Dumbledore's true nature. And they were offering him a powerful tool for gathering intelligence. When you're done, George demonstrated, tapping the map again, just say, mischief managed, and it'll go blank again. Harry watched as the map disappeared, leaving what appeared to be a blank piece of parchment. Thank you, he said sincerely. This is incredible. Use it well, Fred said with unusual seriousness. And Harry? If you ever need backup, or a distraction, George interjected. Or just someone to talk to about certain bearded individuals, we're your men, they concluded together. With that, they sauntered off, leaving Harry with the blank parchment and a head full of new possibilities. That night, after his roommates were asleep, Harry closed the curtains around his bed and whispered, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. By the map's light, he watched as Dumbledore's dot finally stopped pacing and settled in what must be his bedroom. Filch patrolled the 3rd floor, while Mrs. Norris prowled the dungeons. In the staff room, Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout appeared to be having a late-night meeting. And there, a dot labeled Severus Snape was moving steadily toward the 3rd-floor corridor that Dumbledore had declared off-limits. Harry watched, fascinated, as Snape entered the forbidden area, paused for several minutes, then exited and headed toward the dungeons. What was the potions master doing in a place students had been warned would cause a most painful death? The mystery of the 3rd-floor corridor had been niggling at Harry for weeks. After the troll incident on Halloween, which he, Ron, and Hermione had survived only through luck and Hermione's quick thinking with a levitation charm, Harry had become convinced that something significant was hidden in the school. The package from Vault 713, perhaps. He resolved to find out what was in that corridor. But he would need help. You want us to what? Hermione hissed the next day, when Harry explained his plan in a secluded corner of the library. Ron looked excited, but Hermione was horrified. Harry, Dumbledore specifically said, I know what Dumbledore said, Harry interrupted. But don't you think it's strange? Why announce a forbidden area in a school full of curious children? Why not just lock it and cast protective spells without telling anyone? It's almost like you want someone to try to get in. Or he's warning everyone to stay away from genuine danger, Hermione countered. Either way, Snape was there last night, Harry insisted. I saw him on through a window when I was up in the astronomy tower. He hadn't told them about the Marauder's map yet, unsure how Hermione would react to such a rule-breaking item and reluctant to share the twins' secret without permission. But why would Snape go there? Ron wondered. That's what I want to find out, Harry said. Look, we don't have to go far in. Just peek and see what's there. If it's too dangerous, we'll leave immediately. Hermione bit her lip, clearly torn between her respect for rules and her growing loyalty to Harry and Ron. The troll incident had solidified their friendship in a way that might never have happened otherwise. There are some things you can't share without becoming friends, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. Fine, she said finally. But only to look. And if there's any sign of danger, we're going straight to Professor McGonagall. Harry nodded, though he had no intention of involving McGonagall. From what he'd observed, the Transfiguration professor was completely loyal to Dumbledore. While she seemed fair and decent, her first instinct would be to report to the headmaster. That night, after the rest of Gryffindor Tower had gone to bed, Harry, Ron, and Hermione slipped out of the common room under Harry's invisibility cloak, another family heirloom that had been mysteriously returned to him at Christmas with only an anonymous note saying it had belonged to his father. Harry suspected Dumbledore's involvement, which made him both grateful and suspicious. Why return the cloak now? Was it another manipulation? The Marauder's map guided them safely past Filch and Mrs. Norris, through the deserted corridors to the third floor. The door to the forbidden corridor was locked, but Hermione solved that problem with a quick Alohomora. The lock clicked and the door swung open. They stepped inside, still huddled under the cloak, and found themselves face to face with a monstrous dog that filled the entire space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, and 3 drooling mouths with yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. They fell backward, Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran, almost flew, back down the corridor. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. "Where on earth have you all been?" she asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. "Never mind that, pig snout," panted Harry, and the portrait swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling, into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, who they'd accidentally petrified earlier when he tried to stop them leaving, had clearly been smuggled in by somebody and was already asleep in his bed. "What do they think they're doing, keeping a thing like that locked up in a school?" said Ron finally. "If any dog needs exercise, that one does." Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. "You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you?" she snapped. "Didn't you see what it was standing on?" "The floor," Harry suggested. "I wasn't looking at its feet, I was too busy with its heads." "No, not the floor. It was standing on a trapdoor. It's obviously guarding something." Harry's mind raced. A trapdoor. Something hidden. The package from Vault 713. Guarding something. He murmured. Then it clicked. "That's it. Remember what Hagrid told us about the Gringotts break-in? The vault that was broken into had been emptied earlier that day, by Hagrid, on Dumbledore's instructions. He took a small package. That's what the dog's guarding. Dumbledore's hiding it here at Hogwarts. But what is it? Ron wondered. What's so valuable or dangerous that it needs that kind of protection? I don't know, Harry admitted. But I intend to find out. Over the next few weeks, Harry's investigation branched in 2 directions. On one hand, he continued to probe the mystery of whatever was hidden beneath the trapdoor, questioning Hagrid, who let slip the name Nicholas Flamel before realizing his mistake, and researching the name in the library with Ron and Hermione's help. On the other hand, he delved deeper into Dumbledore's political and financial activities, corresponding regularly with Blood Fong and using the Marauder's map to track the headmaster's movements within the castle. A pattern emerged. Dumbledore frequently met with Professor Quirrell in private, often late at night in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom or the headmaster's office. Their meetings never lasted long, but they occurred with surprising regularity. What business could Dumbledore have with the nervous, stuttering professor that required such frequent discussion? Equally interesting was Snape's behavior. The potions master seemed to be watching Quirrell almost as closely as Harry was watching Dumbledore. On several occasions, Harry spotted Snape's dot on the map following Quirrell through the castle, maintaining a distance but clearly trailing him. Meanwhile, Harry's own interactions with Dumbledore remained minimal. The headmaster would smile benevolently at him during meals, eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles, but never approached him directly. It was as if Dumbledore was content to observe from afar, at least for now. Harry's other relationships, however, were flourishing. His friendship with Ron and Hermione deepened daily. Ron's strategic mind and humor complemented Hermione's intelligence and thoroughness, making them an effective team. Harry had also made a point of cultivating a relationship with Neville, remembering the connection between their families. "Gran never talks much about my parents," Neville confided one evening as they worked together on a herbology assignment. "Just says they were brave and that I should be proud." "What happened to them?" Harry asked gently. "If you don't mind talking about it." Neville was quiet for a long moment. "They were tortured," he finally whispered. "By you-know-who's followers. After he disappeared. They were looking for information about where he'd gone." His hands trembled slightly. "They're in St. Mungo's, that's the wizard hospital. They don't recognize me when I visit." Harry felt a wave of empathy so powerful it momentarily took his breath away. In some ways, Neville's situation was even worse than his own. At least Harry's parents were at peace. Neville had to face the shells of his parents, alive but unreachable. "I'm sorry, Neville," Harry said, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I didn't know." Neville shrugged, trying to seem casual though his eyes were damp. "Not many people do. Gran doesn't like to talk about it. Says it upsets people." "My parents were friends with yours," Harry said. "Did you know that?" "I found out when I went to Gringotts before school started." "Really?" Neville looked surprised. "Gran never mentioned that." "They fought together against Voldemort," Harry continued, ignoring Neville's flinch at the name. "I don't know all the details yet, but I'm trying to learn more about that time." "About what really happened?" Neville studied him curiously. "Why? I mean, isn't it painful to think about?" Harry considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes. But I think it's important to understand our history, to know where we come from and what our parents stood for." "Don't you ever want to know more about your parents? Not just that they were brave, but what they believed in, what they fought for." "I suppose I do," Neville admitted. "Gran just says I should focus on living up to their legacy, not dwelling on the past." "Maybe understanding their legacy is part of living up to it," Harry suggested. Neville nodded slowly, a new light in his eyes. "Maybe you're right, Harry." As winter settled over Hogwarts, blanketing the grounds in snow and ice, Harry felt both more at home and more alert to danger than ever before. The castle was a sanctuary of sorts, the first place he'd truly belonged, but it was also the domain of the man who had stolen his inheritance and, Harry increasingly suspected, was manipulating events for some greater purpose that remained obscure. The mystery of Nicholas Flamel continued to elude them until Christmas break, when Hermione returned from holiday with the crucial piece of information. "I found him," she whispered excitedly, slapping an enormous old book down on the table in front of Harry and Ron in the common room. "Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone." "The what?" said Harry and Ron together. "Oh, honestly, don't you two read? Look, read that, there." She pushed the book toward them, and Harry and Ron read. The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Philosopher's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Perenelle, 658. "See," said Hermione, when Harry and Ron had finished. "The dog must be guarding Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him, because they're friends and he knew someone was after it, that's why it was moved out of Gringotts." "A stone that makes gold and stops you from ever dying," said Harry. "No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want it. And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in that study of recent developments in wizardry," said Ron. "He's not exactly recent if he's 665, is he?" But Harry's mind was racing in a different direction. Immortality. Unlimited gold. Who would want such things more than Voldemort himself? The dark wizard who had killed Harry's parents, who had terrorized the wizarding world for years, who had seemingly been vanquished but whose body had never been found. What if Voldemort wasn't as gone as everyone believed? What if he was somehow connected to the attempts to steal the stone? And what was Dumbledore's role in all this? Was he genuinely protecting the stone, or was there some more complex game being played? Harry remembered something Hagrid had let slip months ago: "Dumbledore's the only one you know who was ever afraid of." Was Dumbledore using the stone as bait, trying to draw Voldemort out? And if so, was Harry himself part of that plan? The answer came sooner than Harry expected, and from an unexpected source. It was a bitterly cold January evening, and Harry was returning from Quidditch practice, the one pure joy he discovered at Hogwarts, flying. Muddy and exhausted, he was crossing the entrance hall when he heard hushed voices from a nearby classroom. "Don't know what game you're playing at, Quirrell," came Snape's silky voice, "but I will find out. Make no mistake about that." I don't know what you mean, Severus," Quirrell stammered in response. "You know perfectly well what I mean. The third floor. Your nocturnal activities. The headmaster may trust you, but I do not. And I will be watching." Harry pressed himself against the wall beside the door, listening intently. "Why you're paranoid," Quirrell replied, but his stutter seemed less pronounced, his tone almost mocking. Perhaps it's why you who has something to hide." "Don't test me, Quirrell." Snape's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Remember where your true loyalties should lie." There was a sudden movement inside the room, and Harry quickly ducked behind a nearby suit of armor. Snape swept out, his black robes billowing, and stalked down the corridor toward the dungeons. A moment later, Quirrell emerged, but instead of his usual nervous demeanor, he stood straight, a cold smile playing on his lips as he watched Snape's departing form. Then, as if sensing Harry's presence, he turned sharply. Harry held his breath, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. Quirrell's eyes scanned the hallway, lingering for a moment on Harry's hiding place before moving on. Then, adjusting his turban, he headed in the opposite direction from Snape. Heart pounding, Harry waited until both professors were well away before continuing to Gryffindor Tower. His mind was racing. Snape suspected Quirrell of going after the stone, that much was clear. But Quirrell's behavior when Snape left had been anything but fearful. The nervous, stuttering professor had momentarily dropped his act, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath. Was it possible that the real threat wasn't Snape at all, but Quirrell? When Harry reached the common room, he found Ron and Hermione playing chess by the fire. He quickly pulled them into a quiet corner and recounted what he'd overheard. "So Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get the stone?" Ron whispered. And Quirrell's resisting? That's what I thought at first, Harry admitted. But you should have seen Quirrell after Snape left. He was different. Confident. Almost sinister. Hermione frowned. You think Quirrell is after the stone, and Snape is trying to stop him? It sounds mad, I know, Harry said. Snape's horrible to us all, especially me. But what if he's actually protecting the stone? What if Quirrell's stutter, his nervousness, what if it's all an act? Ron looked skeptical. But Quirrell is terrified of his own shadow. And Snape, well, Snape just seems like exactly the sort who'd want a stone that makes you immortal and rich. Appearances can be deceiving, Hermione said slowly. And it would be the perfect cover, wouldn't it? Everyone suspects the dark, brooding potions master with his interest in the dark arts. No one looks twice at poor, stuttering Professor Quirrell. Harry nodded emphatically. Exactly. And there's something else, Quirrell's turban. Haven't you noticed the strange smell around it? And how he never takes it off, not even during meals. It does smell funny, Ron agreed. Fred and George reckon it's stuffed full of garlic to ward off vampires. But what if it's hiding something else? Harry pressed. Something, or someone. Hermione gasped. Harry, you can't possibly think, I don't know what to think, Harry interrupted. But I do know that nothing about this situation is what it seems. And somehow, it's all connected, the stone, Quirrell, Snape, Dumbledore, and me. You. Ron echoed. Why you? Harry hesitated. He'd never told them about the Gringotts audit, about Dumbledore's theft of his inheritance. It wasn't that he didn't trust them, but the fewer people who knew, the better, for their safety as much as his secrecy. Because of who I am, he said finally. The boy who lived. The one who supposedly defeated Voldemort. Ron winced at the name, but Harry continued. What if Voldemort isn't really gone? What if he's trying to use the Philosopher's Stone to return? And what if Dumbledore knows this, is counting on it, even, and has set up this whole situation as a trap? A trap that puts an entire school of children at risk? Hermione sounded appalled. It wouldn't be the first time Dumbledore's judgment has been questionable, Harry said carefully. Something in his tone made both Ron and Hermione look at him curiously. Harry, Hermione said slowly, is there something you're not telling us? Harry met their eyes, seeing concern and loyalty there. These were his friends, perhaps the first real friends he'd ever had. They had stood by him through dangerous adventures and mundane school days alike. If he couldn't trust them, who could he trust? There is, he admitted. Something I discovered before school even started. About Dumbledore. About my parents' estate. And so, there in the quiet corner of the Gryffindor common room, Harry finally told them about his visit to Gringotts, about the inheritance test, about the 12 million Galleons that Dumbledore had systematically removed from his vaults over the past decade. Ron's face went from disbelief to shock to outrage as Harry spoke. Hermione's expression was harder to read, analytical, processing, connecting dots. That's why I've been watching Dumbledore so closely, Harry concluded. I don't know why he took the money or what he's done with all of it. But I do know that he's not the benevolent, grandfatherly figure everyone thinks he is. He's calculating. He plans. And for some reason, those plans involved stealing from me while leaving me in an abusive home. There was a long silence when he finished. Blimey, Harry, Ron finally whispered. 12 million Galleons. That's an obscene amount of money, Hermione finished for him. But why would Dumbledore need to steal? He's the chief warlock, the supreme mugwump, surely he has his own wealth. It's not just about the money, Harry said. It's about control. According to the goblins, Dumbledore's been using my inheritance to fund his political activities, to make donations to ministry officials who later support his policies. He's been building and maintaining his power base with my family's fortune. That's corrupt, Hermione said, sounding shaken. Her faith in authority figures was being severely tested. Have you confronted him? Harry shook his head. Not yet. The goblins advised me to learn more first, to understand the full picture before making a move. Dumbledore's powerful, connected. If I accuse him without ironclad evidence and a clear understanding of his motives, he could easily dismiss it or cover it up. So that's why you've been so interested in the third-floor corridor, in the stone, Ron realized. You think it's connected to whatever Dumbledore's planning. I don't know, Harry admitted. But it seems like too much of a coincidence, Dumbledore moving the stone to Hogwarts the same year I arrive. Announcing its presence in a way that practically invites curiosity. Setting up protections that 3 first years have already partially figured out. It does seem suspicious when you put it like that, Hermione acknowledged. Almost like he wants someone to go after it. Or like he's testing someone, Harry said quietly. Testing me. They stared at him. Think about it, Harry continued, warming to his theory. The troll at Halloween, Ron and I only survived because we happened to know Hermione was in the bathroom. The Quidditch match where my broom was jinxed, Hermione stopped it by setting fire to Snape's robes, but what if he wasn't the one jinxing it in the first place? What if it was Quirrell, and Snape was actually performing the counter-jinx? And Fluffy, Ron added, getting excited. We only found out about the trapdoor because we happened to hide in that corridor from Filch. Exactly, Harry nodded. It's like a series of challenges, each one testing different skills or qualities. Bravery, friendship, quick thinking. But why? Hermione asked. What would be the point of testing you like that? Harry rubbed his scar absently. I don't know. But I intend to find out. As winter gave way to spring, Harry's investigations deepened on both fronts. His correspondence with Bloodfang revealed more about Dumbledore's political maneuvering with his stolen fortune, while his observation of Quirrell, aided by the Marauder's map, confirmed his suspicions that the defense professor was not what he appeared. On multiple occasions, the map showed Quirrell's spending hours in his private quarters, pacing back and forth as if in conversation with someone, though no other appeared in the room with him. Even more suspicious, late at night, Quirrell's would often venture toward the third-floor corridor, lingering outside the door but never entering. The final piece of the puzzle came in late April, during an evening walk on the grounds. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had been visiting Hagrid, who had somehow acquired a dragon egg and was now attempting to hatch it in his wooden hut, a disaster waiting to happen. As they tried to talk sense into the giant man, Harry asked casually how he'd gotten the egg in the first place. Won it, said Hagrid proudly. Last night in the village, having a few drinks and got into a game o' cards with a stranger. Think he was quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest. But what did you talk about with him, Hagrid? Did he ask about Hogwarts? Harry pressed, a suspicion forming. Well, yeah, he asked what I did, and I told him I was gamekeeper here. He asked a bit about the sort of creatures I look after. I told him, and I said what I'd always really wanted was a dragon, and then. I can remember too well, 'cause he kept buying me drinks. Let's see, yeah, then he said he had the dragon egg and we could play cards fair it if I wanted, but he had to be sure I could handle it, he didn't want it to go to any old home. So I told him, after Fluffy, a dragon would be easy. And did he seem interested in Fluffy? Harry asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Well, yeah, how many 3-headed dogs do you meet, even around Hogwarts? So I told him, Fluffy's a piece o' cake if you know how to calm him down, just play him a bit o' music and he'll go straight off ter sleep. Hagrid suddenly looked horrified. I shouldn't ha' told ya that. Forget I said it. But it was too late. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged alarmed looks. Someone, Quirrell, almost certainly, had deliberately gotten Hagrid drunk to extract information about how to get past Fluffy. And now they knew too, music was the key to getting past the first guardian of the stone. We need to warn Dumbledore, Hermione said as they hurried back to the castle. If Quirrell knows how to get past Fluffy, but we don't have proof it's Quirrell, Ron pointed out. And anyway, Dumbledore already knows about Fluffy, he's the one who put him there. What if Dumbledore's not even at Hogwarts? Harry said suddenly, remembering something he'd seen on the Marauders map that morning. His dot wasn't in the castle earlier today. He might have been called away. They raced to Professor McGonagall's office to ask about Dumbledore's whereabouts, only to be told that the headmaster had indeed been called to London on urgent ministry business. He received an owl from the Ministry of Magic and left immediately for London, McGonagall explained, looking at them suspiciously over her glasses. Why do you want to know? It's about the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said desperately. Someone's going to try to steal it. McGonagall's book slid from her arms to the floor. How do you know? She spluttered. Professor, we think, that someone's going to try to steal the stone. We've got to talk to Professor Dumbledore, Hermione pleaded. Professor Dumbledore will be back tomorrow, said McGonagall, recovering. I don't know how you found out about the stone, but rest assured, it is perfectly well protected. Now, I suggest you all go back to your dormitories and forget about it. But Harry couldn't forget about it. All the pieces were falling into place. Dumbledore conveniently called away. Quirrell now knowing how to get past Fluffy, the stone left vulnerable. It's tonight, he told Ron and Hermione as they huddled in a deserted corridor after leaving McGonagall. Quirrell's going after the stone tonight. Snape knows it. That's why he's been watching Quirrell so closely. And now Dumbledore's gone. But what can we do? Hermione asked, wringing her hands. Harry took a deep breath. We go after it ourselves. Tonight. We get to the stone before Quirrell does. Ron and Hermione stared at him. You're mad. Ron exclaimed. We can't. Hermione protested. After what McGonagall said. We'll be expelled. So what? Harry shouted, surprising even himself with his vehemence. Don't you understand? If Quirrell gets the stone, he's giving it to Voldemort. There won't be any Hogwarts to get expelled from. Voldemort will come back, and when he does, do you think he'll leave the school standing? Do you think he'll leave any of us alive? Ron and Hermione looked stunned by his outburst. You're right, Hermione said quietly after a moment. We have to stop him. I'm in too, Ron added, his face pale but determined. But how are we going to get past Fluffy? Harry grinned grimly. I think I know just the thing. That night, armed with Harry's invisibility cloak, a wooden flute Hagrid had carved for Harry at Christmas, and a grim determination, the three friends set out for the third-floor corridor. The castle was quiet, most students and staff already in bed. Using the Marauders' map, they avoided Filch and Mrs. Norris with ease. When they reached the door to Fluffy's chamber, Harry checked the map one last time. There, a dot labeled Quirinus Quirrell was moving swiftly away from the third floor, heading toward what appeared to be a back staircase. He's already been here, Harry whispered, pointing to the map. He's heading down, probably already past the trapdoor. Then we need to hurry, Hermione urged. Harry put the map away and pulled out the flute. I'll play, you two open the trapdoor, he instructed. Then I'll hand the flute to Hermione when I jump, so she can keep playing until we're all down. The moment they opened the door, Fluffy's three enormous heads all turned in their direction, noses twitching, eyes staring even though the cloak still covered them. Harry immediately began to play the flute, a tuneless melody, but effective. The dog's eyes began to droop, and soon it was snoring heavily, all three heads slumped on the floor. Keep playing, Ron warned Harry as they slipped out from under the cloak and crept toward the trapdoor. Ron pulled it open, revealing a dark drop with no visible bottom. I'll go first, Ron volunteered, peering into the darkness. If something happens to me, get back under the cloak and go straight to the Ollery, send Hedwig to Dumbledore. Right, Harry nodded, continuing to play. Ron lowered himself through the trapdoor until he was hanging by his fingertips. "See you in a minute, I hope," he said, and let go. After a moment, his voice floated up, sounding relieved. "It's okay. It's a soft landing." Harry handed the flute to Hermione, who continued playing as he jumped, followed a moment later by Hermione herself. They landed on something soft and plant-like, Devil's Snare, Hermione quickly identified. When it began to wrap its tendrils around them, she conjured bluebell flames that drove the plant away, allowing them to drop to solid ground below. From there, they faced a series of challenges, a room full of flying keys, where Harry's seeker skills allowed him to catch the right one, a giant wizard's chess set, where Ron's strategic brilliance led them to victory, though at the cost of him being knocked unconscious, and a logic puzzle of potions guarding the final door, which Hermione solved but which only had enough of the right potion for one person to proceed. "You drink it," Hermione told Harry, pointing to the small bottle that would allow passage through the black flames ahead. "I'll take Ron back, get help." Harry nodded, his heart pounding. "Be careful. And, thank you. Both of you." Hermione suddenly threw her arms around him. "Harry, you're a great wizard, you know." "Not as good as you," he replied with a small smile. "Me," said Hermione. "Books. And cleverness. There are more important things, friendship and bravery and, oh Harry, be careful." With a final nod, Harry drank the potion and stepped through the flames. The chamber beyond was large and circular, with a familiar figure standing before the Mirror of Erist, a magical mirror Harry had discovered over Christmas that showed the viewer's deepest desire. But it wasn't Snape. It wasn't even Quirrell. It was Quirrell's turban, unwrapped to reveal a second face growing out of the back of his head. A terrible face with glaring red eyes and slits for nostrils, like a snake. "Voldemort," Harry whispered. The face smiled, a horrifying sight. "Yes, Potter. See what I have become. Mere shadow and vapor. I have form only when I can share another's body, but there have always been those willing to let me into their hearts and minds. Unicorn blood has strengthened me, these past weeks, and once I have the elixir of life, I will be able to create a body of my own. Now, why don't you come here and help me with this mirror?" Harry found himself walking forward, his scar burning with proximity to the dark wizard who had murdered his parents. The Mirror of Erist stood between them, its inscription, Erist stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi, glinting in the torchlight. "I see the stone. I'm presenting it to my master, but where is it?" Quirrell muttered, staring into the mirror. "Use the boy," rasped Voldemort's voice. Quirrell beckoned Harry forward. "Look in the mirror, Potter. Tell me what you see." Harry stood before the mirror, expecting to see his parents as he had at Christmas. Instead, he saw his reflection smile at him, put its hand into its pocket, and pull out a blood-red stone. His reflection winked and put the stone back in its pocket, and as it did so, Harry felt something heavy drop into his real pocket. Somehow, incredibly, he had gotten the stone. "Well," said Quirrell impatiently. "What do you see?" Harry thought quickly. "I see myself shaking hands with Dumbledore," he lied. "I've won the House Cup for Gryffindor." Quirrell cursed and pushed him aside, but Voldemort wasn't fooled. "He lies. He lies." The face hissed. "Potter, come back here." Quirrell shouted. "Tell me the truth. What did you just see? Let me speak to him, face to face." Voldemort commanded. "Master, you are not strong enough." Quirrell protested. "I have strength enough, for this." Harry watched in horror as Quirrell turned completely, so that Voldemort's face was now facing him. It was chalk white with glaring red eyes and slits for nostrils, like a snake. "Harry Potter." It whispered. "See what you have reduced me to. Mere shadow and vapor. I have form only when I can share another's body, but there have always been those willing to let me into their hearts and minds. Once I have the elixir of life, I will be able to create a body of my own. Now, give me the stone in your pocket. So he knew. Harry stumbled backward, his hand closing around the stone in his pocket. Don't be a fool, snarled Voldemort. Better save your own life and join me. Or you'll meet the same end as your parents. They died begging me for mercy. Liar. Harry shouted suddenly, his fear replaced by white-hot anger. Quirrell was walking backward toward him, Voldemort's face still fixed on Harry. How touching. Voldemort hissed. I always value bravery. Yes, boy, your parents were brave. I killed your father first, and he put up a courageous fight, but your mother needn't have died, she was trying to protect you. Now give me the stone, unless you want her to have died in vain. Never. Harry sprang for the door, but Quirrell seized his wrist. At once, a needle-sharp pain seared across Harry's scar, his head felt as though it was about to split in two. To his astonishment, Quirrell let go of him, howling in pain. Looking down at his hands, Harry saw they were blistering before his eyes. Master, I cannot hold him, my hands, my hands. Then kill him, fool, and be done, screeched Voldemort. Quirrell raised his wand, but Harry instinctively reached out and grabbed Quirrell's face. Quirrell screamed and tried to throw Harry off, and though Harry's scar was still burning with a pain that almost blinded him, he could see that Quirrell's skin was burning, cracking, turning to ash wherever Harry touched him. Realizing his touch was somehow destroying Quirrell, Harry lunged forward and grasped the professor with both hands. Quirrell shrieked in agony as his body began to crumble. The last thing Harry heard before losing consciousness was Voldemort's furious scream and the sound of footsteps rushing into the chamber. Harry awoke in the hospital wing, sunlight streaming through the windows. Beside his bed sat Albus Dumbledore, watching him with those twinkling blue eyes that now seemed less benevolent and more calculating to Harry's perception. Good afternoon, Harry, said Dumbledore. Harry stared at him, memories flooding back. Sir. The stone. Quirrell. Voldemort. Calm yourself, my boy, you're a little behind the times, said Dumbledore soothingly. Quirrell does not have the stone. Then who does? The stone has been destroyed. My friend Nicholas and I have had a little chat, and agreed it's all for the best. But won't he and his wife die? They have enough elixir stored to set their affairs in order. Yes, they will die, but as Nicholas says, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. Harry absorbed this, his mind racing. Had Dumbledore planned this all along? Had the whole affair with the stone been an elaborate test, or trap? Sir, he said carefully, I've been thinking. Was the stone really in danger? Or was it all a setup? Something flickered behind Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles. What makes you ask that, Harry? The protections, Harry explained. They seemed designed to be overcome by first years, if they had the right skills. Fluffy, Hagrid let slip how to get past him too easily. The Devil's Snare, any student who paid attention in herbology would know about it. The flying keys, convenient that there was a broomstick right there for a seeker like me. The chess set, perfect for Ron, who's brilliant at chess. The logic puzzle, made for someone like Hermione. It's almost as if you wanted us to go after the stone. Dumbledore's expression remained benign, but Harry thought he detected a hint of surprise, not at the theory, but at Harry's articulation of it. You have a remarkable mind, Harry, the headmaster said finally. Far more perceptive than I anticipated. Yes, I confess that I arranged certain aspects of the protections with the talents of you and your friends in mind. But why? Harry pressed. Why put us in danger? Why put the entire school at risk? Dumbledore sighed deeply. I had my reasons, Harry. Voldemort's return is inevitable, the events in the chamber prove that. When he does return in full, you will be his primary target. I needed to know if you were ready. If you could face him and survive. So it was a test, Harry said flatly. You risked my life, and Ron's, and Hermione's, to test me. To prepare you, Dumbledore corrected gently. The skills and courage you demonstrated will be essential in the coming conflict. Harry felt cold anger building inside him. This was the man who had stolen 12 million galleons from him while leaving him to suffer at the Dursleys. And now he was openly admitting to manipulating Harry into a potentially fatal confrontation with Voldemort. And what about Quirrell? Harry asked. Did you know Voldemort was possessing him? A shadow crossed Dumbledore's face. I suspected. Professor Snape's vigilance confirmed my suspicions, which is why I placed him as another layer of protection. But I did not know for certain until it was too late. And when you were called to London, that was part of it too. Making sure I'd have to face Voldemort alone. The urgent summons was indeed a ruse, though not of my making, Dumbledore admitted. I realized it as soon as I reached London and returned as quickly as possible. I arrived in the chamber just after you lost consciousness. Harry processed this information, his mind working furiously. Dumbledore had engineered this entire situation, placing the stone at Hogwarts, designing challenges that Harry and his friends could overcome, perhaps even ensuring Hagrid let slip the information about Flammel and Fluffy. And all to test Harry's readiness to face Voldemort. Just as he had used Harry's inheritance to fund his political activities. Just as he had placed Harry with the Dursleys despite the abuse. It was all part of some grand design that Dumbledore had never bothered to explain or justify. I see, Harry said coolly. One more question, sir. Why did Quirrell's skin burn when I touched him? If Dumbledore was surprised by Harry's sudden shift in topic, he didn't show it. Your mother died to save you, Harry. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark, not a scar, no visible sign, to have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. Quirrell, full of hatred, greed, and ambition, sharing his soul with Voldemort, could not touch you for this reason. It was agony to touch a person marked by something so good. Harry nodded slowly, filing away this information about his mother's protection. It might prove useful. Now, enough questions, Dumbledore said brightly. I suggest you make a start on these sweets. Ah. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. I was unfortunate enough in my youth to come across a vomit-flavored one, and since then I'm afraid I've lost my liking for them, but I think I'll be safe with a nice toffee, don't you? He smiled and popped the golden brown bean into his mouth. Then he choked and said, alas. Earwax. Harry watched him leave, his mind churning with all he had learned. Dumbledore had just openly admitted to manipulating him, to designing a potentially lethal test for an 11-year-old boy. Combined with the theft of his inheritance, it painted a disturbing picture of the headmaster's methods and morality. The time for patient observation was over. Harry needed to act, to confront Dumbledore about the stolen galleons and demand answers. But first, he needed to make sure he had all the evidence, all the leverage, and all the protection he could muster. The final confrontation was coming. And Harry Potter intended to be ready. Chapter 3, Confrontation and Reclamation. The summer at Privet Drive was different this time. The Dursleys, terrified by Hagrid's visit the previous year and Harry's casual mentions of his murderer godfather, gave him a wide berth. He had Dudley's second bedroom permanently now, and while they didn't exactly feed him well, they no longer actively starved him either. But the real difference was inside Harry. He was no longer the same boy who had once cowered in a cupboard under the stairs. His first year at Hogwarts had changed him, the discovery of Dumbledore's theft, the confrontation with Voldemort, the realization that adults couldn't be trusted simply because they were adults. He spent the summer planning. His room had become a war chamber of sorts. Parchments covered the walls, connected by colored string, red for Dumbledore's financial activities, blue for his political connections, green for his educational decisions at Hogwarts. In the center, A detailed timeline tracked the headmaster's actions since the night Harry's parents died. Hedwig flew nightly, carrying letters to Gringotts, to Ron and Hermione, and occasionally to other contacts Harry had carefully cultivated. The Goblins' audit had progressed significantly, uncovering a web of transactions that painted a disturbing picture of Dumbledore's activities over the past decade. Phoenix Foundation expenditures remain largely unaccounted for, Blood Fong had written in his most recent report. Approximately 4.3 million galleons transferred to unnamed research initiatives. We've traced another 2.1 million to political donations to members of the Wizengamot who subsequently voted in accordance with Dumbledore's positions. The remaining funds were divided between maintenance of multiple properties under Fidelius charms, locations unplottable, stipends to various order members, and direct transfers to Dumbledore's personal accounts. Harry had pinned this letter at the center of his wall, the words "Order Members" circled in thick black ink. The Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's secret organization during the First War against Voldemort. Harry had found references to it in his research, but concrete information was scarce. That the headmaster was still funding it a decade after Voldemort's supposed defeat raised troubling questions. Even more disturbing was a separate document the Goblins had uncovered, a copy of his parents' will, which explicitly stated that under no circumstances was Harry to be placed with the Dursleys. Sirius Black had been named his guardian, with Alice and Frank Longbottom, Neville's parents, as alternatives. Both options had been ignored by Dumbledore, who had sealed the will and appointed himself Harry's magical guardian without legal authority. "Your parents' will was magically binding," Blood Fong had explained. For it to be overridden would require either a full session of the Wizengamot or the personal intervention of the Minister for Magic, with appropriate documentation. Neither occurred. The will was simply sealed and ignored. Harry had underlined this passage several times, his quill digging so deeply into the parchment it had nearly torn. This wasn't just theft, it was a complete disregard for his parents' final wishes, for wizarding law, for Harry's own well-being. And for what? To keep him downtrodden and malleable. To ensure he'd view Hogwarts and, by extension, Dumbledore as his salvation. To make him willing to sacrifice himself when the time came. The thought made Harry's blood boil. But anger alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to be strategic, needed to build his case methodically and present it at exactly the right moment. A soft hoot from Hedwig pulled Harry from his thoughts. She had returned from her latest delivery to Gringotts, bearing a thick envelope sealed with the bank's official wax emblem. "Thanks, girl," Harry murmured, stroking her feathers before offering her an owl treat. He carefully broke the seal and removed several documents. The first was a formal letter from Ragnarok himself. "Mr. Potter, our audit is now complete. The enclosed documents constitute legally admissible evidence of systematic financial malfeasance by Albus Dumbledore in his capacity as your self-appointed magical guardian. Additionally, we have prepared the inheritance claim forms as you requested. Upon your 12th birthday, July 31st, you will be eligible to claim emancipation under Clause 7 of the Ancient Houses Preservation Act, given your status as the last heir to multiple noble and most ancient houses. Emancipation would remove Dumbledore's guardianship permanently and grant you full access to your inheritance. It would also protect you from any attempts to appoint a new guardian. I recommend you visit Gringotts at your earliest convenience after your birthday to complete the necessary rituals and formalize your status. May your gold always flow and your enemies tremble before you. Ragnarok Director, Gringotts London Branch. Harry smiled grimly. Emancipation. The word tasted like freedom on his tongue. No more Dursleys. No more Dumbledore controlling his life and finances. The ability to make his own choices, to live where he wanted, to access his full inheritance. The second document was a formal complaint against Dumbledore, detailing every unauthorized withdrawal, every misappropriation of funds, every violation of fiduciary duty. It required only Harry's signature to file it officially with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The third was a complete accounting of Harry's inheritance, properties, investments, heirlooms, and liquid assets across the Potter, Black, Peveril, and Gryffindor vaults. Even after Dumbledore's theft, the total was staggering, well over 50 million galleons in gold alone, plus properties throughout Britain and Europe, significant stock in various magical businesses, and priceless magical artifacts. Harry set these documents aside carefully. His 12th birthday was just 2 weeks away. Once he was emancipated, once he had full legal control of his inheritance, he could move against Dumbledore from a position of strength. Until then, he had preparations to make. On the morning of his 12th birthday, Harry Potter stood outside the gleaming white facade of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. He'd slipped away from Privet Drive before dawn, summoning the night bus with a wand motion Blood Fong had described in his letters. The trip to London had been nauseating but quick, depositing him in Diagon Alley just as the shops were beginning to open. Unlike his previous visit a year ago, Harry came alone this time. No Hagrid to guide him, or to report back to Dumbledore. He was dressed in the best of his meager wardrobe, his hair futilely combed over his scar, the signet ring of his houses prominently displayed on his finger. Mr. Potter, a goblin greeted him at the top of the marble steps, bowing slightly. Director Ragnarok awaits you. This way, please. Harry followed the goblin through the bank's grand lobby, noticing how other goblins paused in their work to watch him pass. There was something like anticipation in their sharp eyes, a sense that today's events held significance beyond a simple financial matter. Ragnarok's office was even more imposing than Harry remembered. The director rose from behind his massive desk as Harry entered, offering a smile that displayed too many pointed teeth to be entirely comforting. Lord Potterblack Peveril Gryffindor, Ragnarok greeted him formally. You honor Gringotts with your presence on this auspicious day. Harry inclined his head in response, as the etiquette books he'd studied suggested. Director Ragnarok. Thank you for your assistance in these matters. May your gold flow and your enemies fall before you. The traditional goblin greeting seemed to please Ragnarok. You have studied our ways. Good. Few wizards bother to learn proper respect. He gestured to a stone basin on a pedestal beside his desk. The ritual of inheritance and emancipation requires blood freely given. Are you prepared? Harry nodded, stepping forward. I am. Then let us begin. What followed was complex and solemn, unlike the simple inheritance test from the previous year. Harry provided 7 drops of blood into the basin, 1 for each of his houses, plus 3 for the ritual itself. The blood swirled, mixed with various potions and powders Ragnarok added, glowing with magical energy. Ragnarok spoke in gobbledygook, the harsh consonants echoing off the stone walls. Magic swirled around Harry, testing his worthiness, his magical maturity, his bloodlines. The signet ring on his finger grew hot, then ice cold, then returned to normal temperature as the ritual recognized and confirmed his status. By blood and by magic, by right of birth and by right of conquest, I name thee Lord Harrison James Potter, head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter, Ragnarok intoned, switching to English. Lord Sirius Orion Black has named thee his heir by blood adoption and magic. Until such time as his status is resolved, I name thee heir presumptive to the noble and most ancient house of Black. Harry blinked in surprise. Blood adoption. Sirius Black, his godfather, currently imprisoned in Azkaban for allegedly betraying Harry's parents, had blood adopted him. That was new information, and potentially significant. Through thy grandmother Doria Black and by the right of conquest over the line of Gaunt, I name thee Lord Peveril, head of the most ancient house of Peveril, Ragnarok continued. By distant blood relation and by the judgment of magic itself, I name thee heir of Gryffindor, claimant to the noble and most ancient house of Gryffindor, one of the 4 founders. The magic swirled more intensely, responding to each proclamation. Harry felt it settling into his bones, into his magical core, changing him subtly but permanently. Being the last of these lines, having demonstrated magical maturity beyond thy physical years, and having suffered grievous wrongs under thy current guardianship, I declare thee emancipated under the Ancient Houses Preservation Act, Section 7, Paragraph 3. A final surge of magic rushed through Harry, breaking unseen bonds. He gasped at the sensation, like chains he hadn't known he was wearing suddenly shattering. His mind felt clearer, his magic more accessible, as if a dampening field had been lifted. "It is done," Ragnarok declared. "You are now, legally and magically, an adult wizard in the eyes of our laws. No one may claim guardianship over you without your explicit consent." Harry exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. What about the trace? The restriction on underage magic? Ragnarok's lips curved in that unsettling goblin smile. The trace is a ministry spell placed on wands sold to minors. As an emancipated lord of multiple ancient houses, you are no longer subject to it. However, he added with a meaningful look, the ministry is not automatically notified of emancipation rituals. They will continue to believe you are subject to the trace unless informed otherwise. Harry nodded, understanding the implication. He could use magic freely, but the ministry, and by extension, Dumbledore, wouldn't know this unless Harry chose to reveal it or was caught doing so. "Now," Ragnarok said, returning to his desk and retrieving a stack of documents, "we have several matters to address. First, your formal complaint against Albus Dumbledore." Harry took the quill Ragnarok offered, skimming the final draft of the complaint before signing with firm strokes. "When will this be filed?" "At your discretion. Once filed, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be required to investigate. Given Dumbledore's position, I recommend careful timing. Keep it in trust for now," Harry decided. "I want to confront him directly first." Ragnarok nodded approvingly. "A warrior's approach. Face your enemy before the legal battle begins." "Exactly. What's next?" "Your properties. As Lord Potter, you own the family manor in Wales, currently under Fidelius' charm with Dumbledore as secret keeper. You cannot access it without his cooperation." Harry frowned. "Can the Fidelius be broken?" "Only by the death of the secret keeper or by their voluntary revelation of the secret. However," Ragnarok added, "as the true owner of the property, you can establish new wards that would alert you to any entry and prevent anyone but yourself from accessing it, effectively locking out even the secret keeper." "Do it," Harry said firmly. "What other properties are immediately available?" "The Black family owns Grimmauld Place in London, though as heir presumptive rather than Lord Black, your access may be limited by House Elf guardianship. The Peverills owned a castle in Gloucestershire, now in ruins but with substantial magical foundations intact. And there is, of course, Godric's Hollow." Harry went very still. "My parents' house. It has been preserved as a memorial," Ragnarok said, his tone softening slightly. "The upper floor was destroyed, but the ground floor remains intact, though abandoned. As Lord Potter, you could reclaim and restore it." Harry swallowed hard, his throat suddenly tight. "I'd like to visit it. Soon. Arrangements can be made." Ragnarok set the property documents aside and pulled forward another folder. "Now, as to your financial holdings. With your emancipation, you have full access to all family vaults. How would you like to proceed?" For the next hour, Harry and Ragnarok discussed investment strategies, access protocols, and the management of Harry's considerable fortune. Harry insisted on a complete overhaul of security measures, ensuring that no one but himself could authorize withdrawals or transactions of any kind. "There is one more matter," Ragnarok said as their business concluded. "The matter of Sirius Black." Harry leaned forward, instantly alert. "What about him?" "As your godfather and the one who blood adopted you, his continued imprisonment presents certain complications. Magical godparents take a binding oath to protect their godchildren. This oath is incompatible with betrayal of the child's parents." Harry's mind raced. "Are you saying Sirius Black couldn't have betrayed my parents?" "I am saying it would have been magically impossible if the godparent ritual was performed correctly. Our records indicate it was. But he's been in Azkaban for a decade. For a crime that magic itself says he couldn't have committed?" Ragnarok spread his hands. "Wizard justice is imperfect. Particularly in times of war and its aftermath. The magical world was in chaos after the Dark Lord's fall. Many were imprisoned hastily. Was he even given a trial? Harry demanded. Our records do not show one. As head of House Black, even as the heir presumptive, you have the right to demand a trial for a family member. Harry stood abruptly, pacing the office. This is outrageous. My godfather, my blood-adopted parent, has been wrongfully imprisoned for my entire life. While the real traitor walked free. So it would appear, Ragnarok agreed calmly. And Dumbledore? As chief warlock, he would have overseen the trials after Voldemort's fall. He would have known about the godparent oath. Indeed. Harry stopped pacing, his green eyes hardening with resolve. Add this to the complaint. And I want a separate document demanding an immediate trial for Sirius Black, citing the godparent oath and lack of due process. It shall be done, Ragnarok promised. Though again, timing will be crucial. Harry nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. I understand. I'll let you know when to file both documents. For now, I need to return to the Dursleys briefly to collect my things. Then I'd like to visit one of my properties, somewhere Dumbledore can't find me until I'm ready to confront him. Ragnarok considered. The Peveril Castle might be best. The ruins are under a notice-me-not charm, and the wards, while ancient, remain powerful. We can send a team to refresh them this afternoon. Perfect. And I'll need a secure way to communicate with Ron and Hermione. They'll be worried if I disappear. Gringotts can provide enchanted journals that allow secure communication between linked books, Ragnarok offered. Useful for confidential matters. I'll take 3, Harry decided. And Director Ragnarok, thank you. For everything. The goblin inclined his head. It has been satisfying to assist in rectifying these injustices. Dumbledore has long treated our treaties with disrespect. Watching his downfall will be most gratifying. Harry left Gringotts with a dragonhide pouch of Galleons, a portkey to the Peveril Castle, 3 enchanted journals, and a new sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he felt truly in control of his destiny. Dumbledore had stolen his inheritance, ignored his parents' will, and left him to suffer at the Dursleys. The headmaster had manipulated Harry into confronting Voldemort, seemingly as a test of his usefulness in some greater plan. And perhaps most unforgivably, he had allowed an innocent man, Harry's rightful guardian, to rot in Azkaban for a decade. It was time for a reckoning. Peveril Castle was both more and less than Harry had expected. The outer walls were indeed in ruins, crumbling stone covered in ivy and moss. But as Harry stepped through the ancient arch that had once been the main entrance, he discovered that the interior was largely intact, protected by magic from the ravages of time and weather. The central keep rose 4 stories high, its grey stone walls solid despite their age. Windows that appeared broken from outside revealed themselves as whole and glazed from within, enchanted to seem ruined to Muggle observers. The great hall, bedchambers, kitchen, and library all stood ready for use, as if the last Peveril had departed only yesterday instead of centuries ago. House elves, it seemed, had maintained the interior through the generations. 3 ancient elves, their skin wrinkled and ears drooping with age, had appeared the moment Harry activated the portkey, nearly fainting with excitement at the arrival of a true Peveril master. "We've been waiting, Master Peveril, sir," squeaked the eldest, introducing himself as Gorky. "The castle has been waiting for a true heir for 347 years, sir." "You've been here all that time?" Harry asked, astonished. "Oh yes, Master Peveril, sir. Peveril Elves is loyal to the blood, sir. We've been keeping the inside ready, just as Master Edmund instructed before he passed without an heir of his body." Harry was given a tour of his new home, for that was how he immediately thought of it, not as a property but as home. The castle was smaller than Hogwarts but still vast for a single occupant, with dozens of rooms spread across multiple levels. The library alone occupied an entire wing of the second floor, filled with ancient tomes on subjects ranging from basic charms to arcane magics Harry had never heard of. Master Edmund was a great scholar, Gorky explained proudly. The Peveril Library is one of the finest in Britain, sir. Harry ran his fingers reverently along the spines of books that had waited centuries for his arrival. Here, perhaps, he would find the knowledge he needed to protect himself from Dumbledore's manipulations and prepare for Voldemort's eventual return. The master suite on the third floor became Harry's immediate living quarters. Unlike the Dursleys' grudgingly provided second bedroom, this was a true lord's chamber, a massive four-poster bed with embroidered hangings, a sitting area before a fireplace large enough to stand in, a private bathroom with a sunken tub the size of a small swimming pool, and a study adjoining the bedroom where Harry could work undisturbed. The elves, delighted to have a master to serve after centuries of mere maintenance, outdid themselves preparing Harry's first dinner in his ancestral home. The table in the great hall, sized for formal banquets with dozens of guests, looked absurd with just Harry sitting at its head, but he couldn't bring himself to disappoint the elves by requesting a smaller setting. After dinner, full and content for perhaps the first time in his life, Harry retreated to the study with one of the enchanted journals Gringotts had provided. He wrote careful messages to Ron and Hermione, explaining, in deliberately vague terms, in case the journals were somehow compromised, that he had claimed his inheritance, left the Dursleys, and was staying at a secure location until school began. "I've learned some disturbing things about D," he wrote, using the initial rather than Dumbledore's full name. "Including information about my godfather that changes everything. I can't explain more in writing, but I'll tell you everything on the train. Please don't worry about me, I'm safer than I've ever been." Both responded quickly, their handwriting appearing on the pages as they wrote in their linked journals. Hermione was predictably concerned about Harry being alone, while Ron seemed impressed by Harry's newfound independence. Both promised to keep his secrets and meet him on the Hogwarts Express as planned. With that obligation fulfilled, Harry turned to the more serious work of preparing for his confrontation with Dumbledore. He arranged the evidence from Gringotts on the mahogany desk, organizing it into clear categories: financial theft, violation of his parents' will, illegal assumption of guardianship, and the matter of Sirius Black's imprisonment. The case against Dumbledore was damning. The question wasn't whether Harry could prove the headmaster's misdeeds, but how best to use that proof to ensure justice without endangering himself or his friends. Direct confrontation carried risks. Dumbledore was politically powerful, magically formidable, and had decades of experience manipulating situations to his advantage. He controlled Hogwarts, held significant sway over the Ministry, and was viewed as a hero by much of Wizarding Britain. Going public immediately might backfire if people chose to believe Dumbledore's inevitable justifications about the greater good over the accusations of a 12-year-old boy, no matter how well documented those accusations might be. No, Harry needed leverage, something beyond financial crimes that would make Dumbledore's position untenable. Something that struck at the heart of the headmaster's public persona as the champion of light, the benevolent guardian of the wizarding world. And Harry thought he knew exactly what that leverage might be. He pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him and began to write. The remainder of the summer passed in intense preparation. Harry divided his time between studying the wealth of magical knowledge in the Peveril Library, corresponding with Gringotts about the ongoing investigation, and planning his strategy for the coming confrontation. The goblins had been particularly helpful in gathering additional evidence against Dumbledore. They'd traced financial connections between the Phoenix Foundation and various ministry officials, documenting how Harry's stolen inheritance had been used to build and maintain Dumbledore's political power base. They'd also uncovered disturbing links between Foundation funds and experimental magic research that appeared to focus on the creation and manipulation of magical bonds, specifically, bonds that could link one person's magic to another's. Most significantly, they'd found evidence that Dumbledore had authorized the sealing of the Potters' wills the very night of their deaths, hours before he delivered baby Harry to the Dursleys. This proved that his placement of Harry with his magic-hating relatives had been a deliberate choice, not a necessity born of emergency. Meanwhile, Harry's study of the Peveril Library yielded insights of a different sort. The ancient family had specialized in protective magic, combat charms, and, most intriguingly, the magic of magical oaths and bindings. One particular tome, Veritas Vinculum, Truth in Bonds, described rituals that could compel honest testimony without the use of veritaserum or other potions that might be countered by skilled wizards. By the time September 1st arrived, Harry had a comprehensive plan in place. He'd arranged for a secure port key to King's Cross, packed his trunk with only the essentials, leaving most of his new books and possessions safely at Peveril Castle, and prepared himself mentally for what was to come. The Hogwarts Express was already crowded when Harry arrived at platform 9 3/4, students hanging out of windows to bid farewell to parents or racing up and down the corridors greeting friends. He found an empty compartment near the back of the train and settled in to wait for Ron and Hermione. They arrived together, bursting into the compartment with matching expressions of concern and relief. "Harry!" Hermione exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. "We've been so worried. Your messages were so cryptic, and then Mr. Weasley said you weren't at the Dursleys when they went to check on you." "Calm down, Hermione," Harry laughed, extracting himself from her embrace. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "You look different," Ron observed, studying Harry with a slight frown. "Taller, maybe? And I dunno, older somehow." Harry wasn't surprised. The emancipation ritual had changed him subtly but noticeably. He stood straighter, more confident. The constant undernourishment of his Dursley years had begun to reverse during his month at Peveril Castle, with regular, nutritious meals prepared by eager house elves. His magic, too, felt more settled, more accessible. "It's a long story," Harry said, casting a quick privacy charm around their compartment, one of many useful spells he'd learned from the Peveril Library. "And I need to tell you everything before we reach Hogwarts." For the next hour, as the train chugged northward through the English countryside, Harry explained everything: the original discovery of Dumbledore's theft, the emancipation ritual, the evidence against Dumbledore, and his suspicions about the headmaster's greater plan. "He's been using me like a chess piece," Harry concluded grimly. "Placed with abusive relatives to keep me humble and desperate for approval. Kept ignorant of my heritage and status to make me malleable. Tested against Voldemort to gauge my usefulness. And all while funding his political activities with money stolen from me." Ron and Hermione sat in stunned silence when he finished, trying to process the enormity of what Harry had revealed. That's unconscionable," Hermione finally whispered, her face pale. "I respected Professor Dumbledore so much. I thought he was the greatest wizard of our time." Harry finished with a hint of bitterness. "That's what he wants everyone to think. But great doesn't mean good, Hermione. What are you going to do?" Ron asked, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "You can't let him get away with it." "I don't intend to," Harry assured him. "I have a plan. But I'll need your help, both of you." He outlined his strategy: a public confrontation in a setting where Dumbledore couldn't easily control the narrative, with witnesses present who couldn't be dismissed or obliviated without raising serious questions. The confrontation would be backed by irrefutable evidence and designed to force Dumbledore into a position where lying would be magically impossible. "It's risky," Hermione worried. "Dumbledore is incredibly powerful, Harry. And he has decades of experience manipulating situations to his advantage." "I know," Harry acknowledged. "But I have one advantage he doesn't know that I know. He still thinks I'm the same naive boy who left Hogwarts in June, grateful for his attention and blind to his manipulations." "When are you planning to do this?" Ron asked. "The welcoming feast," Harry said decisively. "Maximum audience, including staff and students from all houses. Dumbledore won't risk a scene in front of the entire school." "He might just refuse to engage," Hermione pointed out. "Dismiss you as confused or mistaken and insist on discussing it privately." Harry smiled grimly. "That's where the second part of my plan comes in." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small golden object that gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the compartment window. "This is a Veritas Vinculum, a truth bond activator. Ancient magic from the Peveril family vaults. Hermione gasped. Harry. Those are incredibly rare, and potentially classified as dark magic by the Ministry. Not dark, Harry corrected. Just old and powerful. It can't force anyone to speak, unlike Veritaserum. It only ensures that what is spoken is truth, binding the participants to honesty for the duration of the activation. And since it's from my family vaults, my use of it is legally protected under inheritance magic laws. Ron looked impressed. So you're going to bind Dumbledore to tell the truth? Brilliant. If he agrees, Harry cautioned. He could refuse. But doing so in public, when accused of serious crimes, would be as damning as a confession. And if he does agree? Hermione asked. Then we learn the truth, not just about the theft, but about everything. Why he left me with the Dursleys. Why he allowed Sirius Black to be imprisoned without trial. What he's planning for me in his greater good schemes. They spent the remainder of the journey refining Harry's plan, identifying potential pitfalls and developing contingencies. By the time the train began to slow as it approached Hogsmeade Station, all three were nervous but resolved. Whatever happens, Harry said, looking at his friends with intense gratitude, thank you. For believing me. For standing with me. Always, mate, Ron said firmly. We're with you, Harry, Hermione added, squeezing his hand. No matter what. The great hall blazed with candlelight, floating candles illuminating the 4 long house tables where students chatted excitedly after the summer separation. The enchanted ceiling above reflected a clear night sky scattered with stars, a perfect backdrop for the annual welcoming feast. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, barely touching his food as he waited for the opportune moment. Dumbledore had greeted him with the usual twinkling smile during the sorting ceremony, apparently noticing nothing unusual in Harry's demeanor. The headmaster now sat at the center of the high table, engaged in conversation with Professor McGonagall, occasionally surveying the student body with benevolent satisfaction. As the main course vanished and desserts appeared on the golden plates, Harry knew it was time. He glanced at Ron and Hermione, receiving determined nods from both. Then he stood, wand in hand, and cast a sonorous charm on himself, another spell from the Peveril Library that wasn't taught until 6th year. May I have everyone's attention, please? Harry's magically amplified voice carried throughout the hall, cutting through the buzz of conversation. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence, and hundreds of eyes fixed on him in surprise. At the high table, Dumbledore straightened, his expression curious but not yet concerned. Snape scowled, likely assuming Harry was seeking attention, while McGonagall's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Mr. Potter, she began, rising from her seat, this is most irregular, I apologize for the interruption, Professor McGonagall, Harry said respectfully but firmly, but what I have to say cannot wait, and it concerns everyone in this hall. Dumbledore raised a hand, silencing McGonagall's protest. Perhaps, Harry, whatever is troubling you could be discussed privately in my office after the feast. He suggested, his voice calm and reasonable. I'm afraid not, Headmaster, Harry replied, meeting the old wizard's gaze directly. What I have to say specifically concerns you, and given the nature of my concerns, I believe transparency is essential. A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy watched with undisguised interest, while the Weasley twins at Gryffindor gave Harry subtle thumbs-up signals. Very well, Dumbledore said after a moment, his blue eyes no longer twinkling. Please proceed, Harry. Harry took a deep breath, then spoke clearly and deliberately. 1 year ago today, I visited Gringotts for the first time and discovered that I was the heir to the noble and most ancient house of Potter. During that visit, I also discovered that you, Headmaster Dumbledore, had been systematically removing money from my inheritance for the past decade, a total of approximately 12 million galleons. Gasps echoed through the hall. At the high table, several professors looked stunned. Snape's scowl deepened, but there was a flicker of something like uncertainty in his eyes. Dumbledore's expression remained composed, though a slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his surprise at Harry's public accusation. "Harry," he said gently, "I fear you have been misinformed. As your magical guardian, I have indeed managed your estate, but always with your best interests. You were never legally my magical guardian," Harry interrupted, his voice steady. "My parents' will, which you sealed the night of their deaths, specifically named Sirius Black as my guardian, with Frank and Alice Longbottom as alternatives. You violated that will, placed me with relatives my parents explicitly prohibited, and appointed yourself my guardian without legal authority." More gasps, and now open murmuring. At the Gryffindor table, Neville Longbottom had gone pale at the mention of his parents. "Furthermore," Harry continued relentlessly, "the money you took was not used for my best interests. I grew up in a cupboard under the stairs, wearing my cousin's cast-off clothes, often denied adequate food, while you used my inheritance to fund your political activities and personal projects." Dumbledore stood now, his demeanor still outwardly calm but his magic beginning to stir perceptibly around him. "These are serious accusations, Harry. I understand you may feel confused or angry about certain arrangements made for your protection, but I assure you, everything was done for the greater good?" Harry challenged, pulling a sheaf of parchments from his robes. "I have here complete documentation from Gringotts detailing every unauthorized withdrawal you made, every property you placed under Fidelius without my knowledge, every political donation you made using my family's gold to curry favor in the Wizengamot." He placed the documents on the Gryffindor table where they were visible to those nearby. Hermione slid them closer protectively, giving anyone who reached for them a fierce look. "Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall interjected, her Scottish accent more pronounced with distress, "surely this matter could be—" "There's more, Professor," Harry said, turning to face her with genuine respect. "On my birthday 3 weeks ago, I underwent the emancipation ritual at Gringotts, legally recognized as Lord Potter Peverell and heir presumptive to House Black. During that process, the goblins informed me that Sirius Black, as my godfather, underwent a magical godparent ritual that would have made it impossible for him to betray my parents. This revelation caused an explosion of noise in the Great Hall. Students at all 4 tables turned to their neighbors in shock and confusion. At the high table, Snape had gone rigid, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Silence!" Dumbledore commanded, and the hall immediately quieted. His magic now swirled visibly around him, his kindly grandfather persona slipping. "Harry, these matters are complex beyond your understanding. Sirius Black's situation involves classified information from wartime. He never received a trial," Harry cut in. "As chief warlock of the Wizengamot, you allowed my godfather, the man legally designated as my guardian, to be sent to Azkaban without due process, despite magical evidence of his innocence. Was it because he would have contested your control over me and my inheritance?" Dumbledore's eyes had lost all twinkle now. "This has gone far enough, Harry. You are speaking of matters you do not fully comprehend, making accusations based on incomplete information. Then let's complete the information, shall we?" Harry proposed, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing the golden Veritas vinculum. It gleamed in the candlelight as he held it aloft. "This is a Peverell family heirloom, a truth bond activator. I challenge you, Headmaster, to join me in a mutual truth bond. If I am mistaken, if you have truly acted in my best interests, you have nothing to fear from binding us both to speak only truth." Shocked silence fell across the hall. Even the professors seemed stunned by this development. Truth bonds were ancient magic, rarely used in modern times, and certainly not by 12-year-old wizards. "Harry," Dumbledore said, his voice harder now, "you cannot possibly understand the dangers of such magic. That artifact is perfectly legal for me to use as Lord Peverell," Harry asserted. "The bond cannot force either of us to speak, only ensure that what we choose to say is truth. Unless you fear what truths might emerge." It was a direct challenge, delivered in front of hundreds of witnesses, students, staff, and even ghosts floating near the ceiling, all watching with bated breath. Dumbledore's options were limited: refuse and appear guilty, or accept and risk the exposure of a decade of manipulation and theft. For a long moment, Dumbledore said nothing, his ancient face inscrutable as he weighed his choices. The silence stretched, tension building in the great hall like a physical presence. "Very well," he said finally, his voice resigned but with an undercurrent of calculation. "But not here. This matter should be addressed in a more appropriate setting, with proper authorities present." "No," Harry said firmly. "Here and now, with everyone as witness. I've spent 10 years in isolation and ignorance because of decisions made behind closed doors. No more secrets, no more manipulations." Dumbledore's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine anger crossing his features before the mask of benevolence returned. "You leave me little choice, Harry." He stepped down from the high table, moving to stand before Harry at the center of the great hall. "I accept your challenge, though I must express my disappointment in your approach." Harry's heart pounded, but he kept his expression steady as he held out the Veritas Vinculum. "Place your hand on the artifact, Headmaster. I, Lord Harrison James Potter Peverell, heir presumptive to House Black, invoke the truth bond between myself and Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore for the purpose of clarifying his actions regarding my person, inheritance, and guardianship." Magic crackled in the air as Dumbledore reluctantly placed his weathered hand on the golden object. The artifact glowed, then emitted a soft chime as the bond activated. A thin strand of golden light connected Harry and Dumbledore, visible to all present. "The bond is active," Harry announced. "Neither of us can speak falsehood until the bond is dissolved. I will begin with a simple question, Headmaster Dumbledore, did you knowingly and deliberately remove approximately 12 million galleons from my family vaults without legal authorization?" All eyes turned to Dumbledore, who appeared to be fighting an internal battle. The bond would not force him to answer, but his silence would be damning. "I did," he finally admitted, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "But you must understand, Harry, those funds were necessary for the greater good, for maintaining the Order of the Phoenix in readiness, for securing political support for policies that would protect our world, for researching protections against Voldemort's eventual return." Gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the hall at the confirmation of Harry's accusations. "Did you seal my parents' will and ignore their explicit wishes regarding my guardianship?" Harry continued. Dumbledore's jaw tightened. "Yes. Sirius Black's situation was complicated. And the blood protection from your mother could only be maintained if you lived with her sister. A protection that required me to call a place home where I was neglected and abused." Harry challenged. "Where I slept in a cupboard until my Hogwarts letter arrived? Where I was regularly starved and punished for accidental magic?" Dumbledore winced visibly. "The protection required your residence. Your treatment there was, unfortunate, but necessary to ensure the wards remained intact." Outrage erupted from the Gryffindor table. The Weasleys in particular looked furious, having glimpsed Harry's treatment when they rescued him from the Dursleys earlier that summer. "Did you know that Sirius Black underwent a magical godparent ritual that would have made it impossible for him to betray my parents?" Harry pressed. "I suspected," Dumbledore admitted reluctantly. "Such rituals were common during the war. But the evidence against Black seemed overwhelming at the time. Yet you never insisted on a trial? Never used veritaserum or pensive testimony to verify his guilt? The Ministry wanted swift justice. The wizarding world needed closure after a devastating war. Certain procedural shortcuts were deemed necessary." Harry's anger flared. "Shortcuts? An innocent man has spent 11 years in Azkaban because of your shortcuts. Sacrifices must sometimes be made in war, Harry," Dumbledore said, his voice hardening. "Individual injustices, regrettable though they may be, must be weighed against the greater needs of our society." "And what about me?" Harry demanded. "Was I just another sacrifice for your greater good? Is that why you left me ignorant of my heritage, my wealth, my place in wizarding society? Why you stole my inheritance and allowed my godfather to rot in prison?" Was I nothing but a weapon to be forged in suffering for your eventual use against Voldemort? The golden strand of the truth bond pulsed, tightening visibly around Dumbledore. The direct questions required a direct answer. Not just a weapon, Harry, Dumbledore said softly, something like genuine regret in his voice. A necessary sacrifice. The night Voldemort attacked your parents, he unintentionally created a Horcrux, a soul fragment, within your scar. You cannot defeat him while that fragment lives. You must die by his hand to destroy it. Everything, your upbringing, the trials you've faced, the trials yet to come, all were designed to prepare you for that eventual sacrifice. The great hall exploded in shocked outcry. McGonagall had gone deathly pale, one hand pressed to her mouth in horror. Snape looked as though he'd been struck, something like betrayal in his normally cold eyes. The students, many too young to fully comprehend the implications, nonetheless understood that something momentous and terrible had been revealed. Harry stood frozen, the confirmation of his worst suspicions landing like a physical blow. Dumbledore had been grooming him for death all along. You knew, Harry whispered, his voice cracking despite his efforts to remain strong. You knew I had a piece of his soul in me, and instead of trying to remove it, you decided I had to die. There is no other way, Harry, Dumbledore said, a note of pleading entering his voice. I have researched extensively. The Horcrux cannot be removed without destroying its vessel, you. I sought to give you a life of purpose before that necessary end, to ensure your sacrifice would not be in vain. A life of purpose? Harry repeated incredulously. You left me abused and neglected. You stole my birthright. You kept me ignorant of everything I should have known. A comfortable, happy child would not willingly walk to his death when the time came, Dumbledore explained, the truth bond compelling his honesty even as whispers of horror spread through the hall. You needed to see death as a release, not a terror. To value the greater good above your own survival. The cold calculation behind those words silenced the hall once more. Even those who had respected or revered Dumbledore looked shaken by this revelation. And my inheritance? Harry asked, his voice steadier now, anger burning away the hurt. 12 million galleons for research that led you to conclude I must die. Or was that just a convenient justification for theft? Dumbledore sighed heavily. The funds were necessary, Harry. The Ministry would not support continued vigilance against a threat they believed long vanquished. Your inheritance represented the largest accessible resource for maintaining readiness against Voldemort's return. And the political donations? The bribes to Ministry officials? Investments in a stable power structure that would be ready to act when needed, Dumbledore insisted. The wizarding world is dangerously resistant to change, Harry. Sometimes influence must be purchased. Harry shook his head in disgust. You've spent a decade preparing for a war while allowing an innocent man to suffer, stealing from an orphan, and planning my death. What gives you the right to make these decisions? To decide whose lives are expendable? For the first time, Dumbledore looked genuinely defensive. I have dedicated over a century to the protection of our world, Harry. My experience, my knowledge, my understanding of the greater patterns at work, these give me perspective that others lack. Sometimes difficult choices must be made by those willing to bear the burden of making them. And who watches the watchers? Harry challenged. Who ensures your difficult choices serve any good greater than your own judgment? The Wizengamot you've packed with officials who owe you favors. The Order members dependent on stipends from my vaults. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Even some of the professors were nodding, the implications of Dumbledore's unchecked power becoming clear. I have only ever acted for the greater good, Dumbledore insisted, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. Your version of it, Harry countered. But here's what you didn't know, Headmaster. The goblins found something you missed in your research. This was a gamble, the goblins hadn't actually found anything, but Harry had developed a theory based on his own research in the Peveril Library. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The Horcrux in my scar can be removed without killing me, Harry stated boldly. The Peveril family archives describe a ritual specifically designed to extract foreign soul fragments from living vessels. It's complex, dangerous, but survivable. Did you even look for alternatives? Or did you decide my death was necessary and stop searching? The truth bond pulsed again, demanding honesty. Dumbledore looked stricken. I consulted the resources available to me. If such a ritual exists, you didn't find it because you didn't really look, Harry interrupted. Because a living Harry Potter with full knowledge of your manipulations was more dangerous to your plans than a conveniently dead martyr. The accusation hung in the air, damning in its plausibility. Around the hall, faces that had shown shock now displayed anger and betrayal. Even staff members who had worked with Dumbledore for decades were looking at him with new, suspicious eyes. I think we've heard enough, came a new voice from the entrance to the Great Hall. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, strode into the hall, flanked by 4 Aurors. Her monocle gleamed in the candlelight as she surveyed the scene with professional detachment. Albus Dumbledore, you are hereby detained for questioning regarding multiple violations of wizarding law, including theft, fraud, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and abuse of office. Dumbledore's eyes widened slightly. Amelia. This is a complex situation that requires, save it for the formal questioning, Albus, Bones interrupted briskly. Your own words under a truth bond have provided more than sufficient cause for immediate detention. You've been listening? Harry asked, surprised. Bones nodded to him respectfully. Lord Potter Peveril. Your emancipation filing alerted my office to potential irregularities. When we received word of your confrontation tonight, I dispatched observers. The entire exchange has been recorded for evidence. Harry hadn't expected this development, but he welcomed it. The presence of law enforcement meant Dumbledore couldn't simply obviate witnesses or otherwise cover up what had transpired. The Veritas Vinculum compelled truth, not comprehensive disclosure, Dumbledore pointed out, still maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. There are aspects of these matters that remain classified for national security. Which you may explain under proper protocols, Bones agreed. But not while maintaining illegal control over an ancient house's heir or funds. She gestured to her Aurors, who moved to flank Dumbledore. The headmaster stood very still, his eyes finding Harry's across the golden strand of the still active truth bond. You cannot understand what you have done today, Harry, he said quietly. Without proper guidance, without the preparations I had planned, Voldemort's return will bring chaos and destruction. The careful balance I maintained, was built on theft and lies, Harry finished for him. If defeating Voldemort requires those, then we're no better than he is. With that, Harry dissolved the truth bond, the golden strand fading to nothingness between them. I, Lord Potter Peveril, release Albus Dumbledore from the truth bond, having established the facts I sought. As the bond dissipated, a profound silence fell over the great hall. For a moment, no one moved, not the students frozen in shock at their tables, not the professors struggling to process what they'd witnessed, not the ghosts hovering near the ceiling. Then Professor McGonagall rose from her seat at the high table, her face ashen but determined. Auror Bones, she said, her Scottish brogue more pronounced with emotion, as deputy headmistress, I will assume temporary leadership of Hogwarts during this investigation. Please be assured of the school's full cooperation. Bones nodded acknowledgement. Thank you, Professor McGonagall. The Board of Governors has already been notified and will be meeting tomorrow to address the situation. As the Aurors prepared to escort Dumbledore from the hall, the headmaster looked once more at Harry. There was no twinkle in his blue eyes now, only a profound weariness and something that might have been regret. I hope, for all our sakes, that you are right about the Horcrux ritual, Harry, he said softly. And that when the time comes, you will find the strength to do what is necessary, even without my guidance. Harry met his gaze steadily. I'll find my own way, headmaster. Without sacrificing others or myself for your greater good. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly, then allowed himself to be led from the great hall, his normally commanding presence diminished by the revelations of the evening. As the doors closed behind him, the spell of silence broke. The hall erupted in shocked conversation, students turning to each other with wide eyes and frantic whispers. At the high table, the professors huddled in urgent discussion, with McGonagall at the center, already taking command. Harry sank back onto the bench at the Gryffindor table, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading, leaving him drained. "You did it," Hermione whispered, squeezing his hand. "Harry, you actually did it." "Bloody brilliant," Ron added, looking at Harry with newfound respect. "But, that bit about the Horcrux ritual. Is that real? Can they actually get that thing out of your scar?" Harry nodded. "The Peveril Library has extensive information on soul magic. I've found references to extraction rituals that might work, though the details are complex. But the important thing is that Dumbledore never even looked for alternatives. He decided I had to die, and that was that. What happens now?" Hermione asked, glancing toward the doors where Dumbledore had departed. "Justice, hopefully," Harry replied. "For Sirius, for my parents, for me. And changes to make sure no one else can abuse power the way Dumbledore did." As if summoned by his words, Amelia Bones approached the Gryffindor table. "Lord Potter Peveril," she said formally, "I would appreciate a moment of your time." Harry stood, facing her with as much composure as he could muster. "Madam Bones." "That was an impressive display of preparation and courage," she said, her stern expression softening slightly. "Few adult wizards would have had the fortitude to challenge Albus Dumbledore so directly." "Thank you," Harry said, unsure where this was heading. "In light of tonight's revelations, I've issued an immediate order for the case of Sirius Black to be reviewed," Bones continued. "If, as you suggested under the Truth Bond, he underwent a magical godparent ritual that would have prevented betrayal of your parents, his conviction will be overturned." Relief flooded through Harry. "Thank you, Madam Bones. That's more important to me than anything else that happened tonight." She nodded briskly. "As for the financial matters, Gringotts has already filed formal documentation. Restitution proceedings will begin immediately. Given Dumbledore's admissions under the Truth Bond, I anticipate a swift resolution." "And Dumbledore himself?" Harry asked. Bones's expression turned grave. "That is more complicated. Despite tonight's revelations, Albus Dumbledore remains one of the most powerful and influential wizards in Britain. Many will argue that his actions, while questionable, were motivated by legitimate concerns about you-know-who's return. The political ramifications of a public trial would be extensive." Harry's heart sank. "So he'll get away with it? Because he's too important to punish?" "I didn't say that," Bones corrected firmly. "Justice will be served, Lord Potter Peveril, but it may take forms you hadn't anticipated. At minimum, Dumbledore will lose his positions as Chief Warlock and Supreme Mugwump. His future at Hogwarts will be decided by the Board of Governors, though after tonight, I cannot imagine they will allow him to return." She paused, then added more quietly, "As for criminal charges, much depends on how aggressively you wish to pursue them. As the primary victim of his actions, your preferences carry significant weight." Harry considered this carefully. He wanted justice, not revenge. And despite everything, he recognized that Dumbledore's warnings about Voldemort's return were likely accurate, even if his methods were unconscionable. "I want him held accountable," Harry said finally. "I want the truth known. But I don't necessarily need to see him in Azkaban, especially if that would destabilize magical Britain when we need to be preparing for Voldemort's return." Bones nodded, looking somewhat relieved. "A mature perspective. We will explore appropriate sanctions that balance justice with pragmatic concerns about national security." She handed him a card. "My direct contact information. Should you require assistance or have additional information to share, please don't hesitate to reach out." As she departed, Harry was suddenly aware that the entire Gryffindor table, indeed, much of the hall, was watching him with expressions ranging from awe to uncertainty. "Is it true?" Neville asked, breaking the silence. "About my parents being named as your guardians?" Harry nodded. "According to the will, yes." "I'm sorry, Neville. If things had gone differently, we might have been raised as brothers." Neville's round face showed a complex mix of emotions, sadness, anger, a tentative hope. "Brothers," he repeated softly. "I would have liked that." Fred and George Weasley slid down the bench to join them. "Magnificent performance, Lord Potter Peveril," George said with an exaggerated bow. "Absolutely top-notch," Fred agreed. "We knew you were up to something big, but this exceeded even our wildest expectations." Harry managed a small smile. "Thanks for the map. It was invaluable for tracking Dumbledore's movements." "Our pleasure," they replied in unison. Percy Weasley, looking shaken but resolute, approached next. "Harry, I want to apologize. I defended the headmaster so many times, insisted he must have good reasons for everything he did. I was wrong." "You weren't the only one who trusted him, Percy," Harry said kindly. "He fooled almost everyone." Across the hall, Harry noticed Draco Malfoy watching him with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, Draco gave him a small, formal nod, acknowledgement of a significant power shift in the wizarding world's complex politics. Professor McGonagall called for order then, her voice magically amplified to reach the entire hall. "Students, please return to your dormitories. Prefects, lead your houses. Classes will proceed tomorrow as scheduled while the Board of Governors addresses these unprecedented circumstances." As the students began to file out, many casting backward glances at Harry, McGonagall descended from the high table and approached him directly. "Mr. Potter," she said, her voice tightly controlled but her eyes suspiciously bright. "I must speak with you privately. Tomorrow morning, if you would come to my office before breakfast." "Of course, Professor," Harry agreed. She hesitated, then added more softly, "I want you to know that I had no knowledge of what Albus revealed tonight. Had I known how you were treated at your relatives', or about the future he envisioned for you, I would never have remained silent." Harry believed her. McGonagall's shock had been genuine, her horror at Dumbledore's revelations unfeigned. "I know, Professor. Thank you." As he followed Ron and Hermione toward Gryffindor Tower, Harry felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The confrontation he'd spent the summer planning had succeeded beyond his expectations, but the revelations it had produced, particularly about the Horcrux in his scar, were sobering. The path ahead remained uncertain. Voldemort would return eventually, with or without Dumbledore's orchestrations. The wizarding world would need to prepare, but perhaps now they could do so without sacrificing their principles, or children, in the process. One thing was clear, though, Harry Potter was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. He was Lord Potter Peveril, heir to ancient magical legacies, and master of his own fate. The inheritance Dumbledore had tried to steal from him wasn't just gold, it was knowledge, power, and most importantly, choice. And Harry intended to use all three to forge a future where no child was ever again deemed an acceptable sacrifice for the greater good. Epilogue 1 month later, Harry stood on platform 9 3/4, watching as a gaunt, haunted-looking man descended shakily from the Hogwarts Express. Sirius Black had been released from Azkaban 2 weeks earlier, after an emergency session of the Wisengamot reviewed his case and found him innocent of all charges. He'd been receiving medical treatment at St. Mungo's since then, beginning the long process of recovery from 11 years of Dementor exposure. Today marked his first visit to Hogwarts, now under the interim leadership of Minerva McGonagall, to meet his godson properly. "Sirius!" Harry called, waving. The man's head turned, and his hollow face transformed with a smile that seemed to strip away years of suffering. "Harry," he whispered, then louder, "Harry." They met in the middle of the platform, Sirius pulling Harry into a fierce embrace. Look at you, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. So like James, but with Lily's eyes. And apparently with her spine of steel as well, taking on Dumbledore like that. Harry grinned, happiness bubbling up inside him. I had good help. And apparently, I inherited some of your recklessness too. Sirius barked a laugh, a rusty sound that suggested it had been years since he'd had reason for genuine mirth. That's my boy. Though from what I hear, you planned your reckless confrontation with all the careful strategy of a master chess player. I had a lot of motivation, Harry said more seriously. Finding out about you was the final straw. I couldn't let him keep you in Azkaban when he knew you were innocent. Sirius sobered. The healers at St. Mungo's told me what you discovered, about the godparent ritual making it magically impossible for me to have betrayed James and Lily. I'd forgotten about that ritual. 11 years with Dementors will do that to your happier memories. But you found it, and you used it to free me. You're my family, Harry said simply. The one my parents chose for me. Tears welled in Sirius's eyes. And you're mine, he replied gruffly. The son I never had. He cleared his throat. Speaking of family, I hear you've been busy claiming your inheritance. Lord Potter Peverell, is it? And my heir, until I get around to formally adopting you? Harry nodded. Is that okay? The goblins said you'd named me your heir years ago, but if you want to change nothing, Sirius interrupted firmly. The Black Fortune should go to you. God knows my family's money could use some redirection towards something positive for once. They began walking together toward the castle, the autumn air crisp around them. So, Minnie's running the show now? Sirius asked, a hint of his old mischievous spirit surfacing. Bet she's whipped the place into shape. Professor McGonagall is brilliant, Harry confirmed. The board appointed her interim headmistress while they conduct a proper search. Most people think they'll confirm her permanently next term. And Dumbledore? Harry's expression turned more serious. House arrest at his brother's place in Hogsmeade. The Wizengamot stripped him of all his positions but stopped short of imprisonment, given his age and prior service to the wizarding world. He's forbidden from contacting me or returning to Hogwarts. Sirius snorted. Got off light, if you ask me. Then again, I might be biased after 11 years in Azkaban thanks to his negligence. He'll live with the consequences of his actions, Harry said thoughtfully. His reputation is shattered, his political power gone. For someone like Dumbledore, that might be worse than prison. As they approached the castle gates, Harry's thoughts turned to the future. The Horcrux in his scar remained a challenge to be addressed, though research in the Peverell Library had yielded promising leads on extraction rituals that wouldn't require his death. Voldemort would return eventually, but now the wizarding world was beginning to prepare more openly, without relying on Dumbledore's secretive methods or child soldiers. And Harry himself was no longer alone. He had Sirius now. He had Ron and Hermione, whose friendship had only strengthened through the turmoil of recent events. He had allies among the goblins, connections forming with other ancient houses through Neville, and even a tentative respect from former adversaries like Draco Malfoy, who had approached Harry after Dumbledore's departure with grudging admiration for his political acumen. Most importantly, Harry had reclaimed not just his stolen gold, but his agency, his right to make his own choices about his life and future. What are you thinking about? Sirius asked, noticing Harry's contemplative expression. Harry smiled, the weight of his inheritance, both its burdens and its privileges, settling comfortably on his shoulders. I'm thinking about legacies, he replied. Not just gold and vaults or names on family trees, but the kind of legacy we create through our choices. My parents chose to stand against Voldemort when they could have hidden. They chose you as my guardian when they couldn't protect me themselves. Those choices matter more than any inheritance. Sirius squeezed his shoulder. Wise beyond your years, kiddo. James and Lily would be so proud of the young man you're becoming. Together, godfather and godson walked through the gates of Hogwarts, not as headmaster and student, not as manipulator and pawn, but as family by choice rather than obligation. And for Harry Potter, that was the most valuable inheritance of all. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.